Just a little introduction first. Most of you probably know who I am. My name is Father Matthew Schneider. I'm a priest of the Legionaries of Christ. I live in the Arlington Diocese. So I'm in a community with 3 priests, like a local community of 3 priests from the Legion. The other 2 priests both work full-time at Divine Mercy University, which is a university focused on Catholic psychology and counseling. So if any of you are thinking about that, they have really good programs for like master's and doctoral programs. They don't do undergrad at all, just grad programs. They have a few different degree programs for that. One's kind of the president administration. The other priest who's with me is more of a professor because what he teaches is basically Christian anthropology, how we understand mankind how we understand the person and how that would affect psychology, which is kind of important. He has a doctoral degree. His is on theology of the body, John Paul II. I myself have been working on my doctoral degree in moral theology. I am almost done. I should defend it in 3 weeks or so. My topic is the right to informational privacy. And so if there's any kind of questions about that, yes, I can definitely, I guess I'm kind of knowledgeable on that. At this point, I'm probably one of the most knowledgeable people in the world on, informational privacy and theology. By informational privacy, I mean to distinguish what I would call decisional privacy in American jurisprudence, which is things like, where it gets ridiculous. It's like, Burgerfall is based on the right to privacy, but it's about marriage, and marriage is by its nature public, like the very act. But it's a decision that they have their private decision somehow and they have a right to privacy over that. Whereas informational privacy is more Facebook and Google and the NSA searching on you, HIPAA, if any of you are old enough to have all the funds of that, which is all your health privacy, a lot of genetic privacy, which is coming up too. So anyways, hopefully that gives you a little sense of who I am. I also have a book coming out on Friday called God Loves the Autistic Mind with Pauline Press. And it's really like a book on autism and prayer. It's kind of divided into 2 parts. The first 30-40% is kind of a systematic presentation of how autistics pray. And the latter 60% is more about us in prayer in the sense of individual devotions, let's meditate on Jesus on the cross, or let's pray about how we struggle with certain interactions or how we stammer, things like that. So yeah, I love how Red Florida Man here is like, to be fair, the Roe vs. Wade justification viewed by almost every legal scholar as being a horrible decision in terms and of basis. And somebody asked me here, will it be an audiobook or Kindle? It will be on Kindle, Nook, and Kubo or Kobo or something like that. I'll just go and grab the link. So I just put a link on my own blog, basically, where I keep a listing of all the different places you can buy it. So I just posted a link in the chat there, and that link should get you all the different places you can buy it: the Pauline Bookstore, Amazon, like Amazon, Pauline Bookstore in Canada, Pauline Bookstore in the UK, a number of different electronic ones. I didn't record any audible version of it or like audiobook. I think we're kind of seeing how this one goes on the first one, and if it's going pretty well, I'd love to do an audiobook. I could, probably take me a week or 2 to kind of record it all. And I'd love to do like a translation to Spanish. I wouldn't do it myself. I could read the Spanish and I could translate Spanish to English, but I can't really do translation English to Spanish, if that makes sense. That is very coherent. I always miss 1 or 2 things, whereas I can do Spanish to English pretty well. And so that's where my book is. So yeah, Now, somebody asked, do you believe that the right to privacy is implied in the Constitution, or if not, it should be amended to create such a right? That's a whole other question. Obviously, there's a certain degree of the right to privacy in the 4th Amendment, which is against unreasonable searches and seizures, in the sense that, like, this being used for things like papers. You have cases back in the 1800s where basically that was like somebody's papers to show their business transactions, which is kind of a private thing, and how private and things like that. But I do think there is some basis for a kind of informational privacy in that regard. I don't know if it might be better to specify it better today. I didn't really get into that as much because my thesis is more on like how we can take what secular thought has come up with and appropriate into theology, and how we can take principles from theology like the seal of the confession, keeping secrets, and expand them to things like informational privacy. So hopefully that's helpful for a capitalism guy who was asking about the Constitution there. So so Joseph's asking me if I work within the church with autistic people. A little bit, not as much as I would like. I kind of hope to really take from the book and be able to help parishes a lot to create kind of sensory friendly masses, or to do things to help autistics in their parishes. The last years I've mainly just been writing my doctoral thesis and writing this book, which is things, and then just keeping up. Probably most of you have seen me online. I'm pretty prolific on Twitter with 60,000 followers and things. So I haven't really had time to do a lot of other stuff. Now that's finishing, I might have time. And I did a talk for a parish out in California like 2 weeks ago. Where's that? I forget the name of the parish that escaped me. I did a talk for them via Zoom. It's in the Bay Area somewhere, but it's not like the main city. It's one of the smaller towns. But so hopefully that's helpful. So
right.
now we're
Sorry
going to go
here.
to the AMA questions that were asked.
Yeah. Hey, sorry about the interruption there. Glad we got started. I had a bit of a meeting go late here at my own parish.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Did we start out with prayer already?
I should start with a prayer. I will.
All right.
I did before I go to these AMA questions. I will start with a prayer. So, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord Jesus, we ask you to help us this day as we all get ready to discuss all the different aspects of the church, and help us to strengthen each other in the faith. Help us to really grow in faith, hope, and love. And we pray together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So,
Thank you, Father.
okay, so anyways, the question I see here is Joseph. He's asking about helping his little sister. One thing I would recommend, if you go to my website, I have on the menu on the top sensory friendly mass directory, and those parishes often have masses that are more helpful for people who are autistic, who can tend to get overwhelmed by the senses of mass, the sensory aspects of mass, like the sound and the music and the incense and everything.
All right. And so, Father, let me go ahead, and to make things a little smoother and easier for both sides, I'll go ahead and read the questions for you, and then you can respond with what answers you have. All right?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I had pulled the AMA questions up on my phone here, even though I have the main Discord open on the main live chat open on my computer. Now, I just before we go to the first question, I see Ammo 9388 has asked a question here about calling me to be a priest. So I didn't know I was autistic when I was called to be a priest. So like I felt the call listening to John Paul II, inviting people to be saints, basically at World UT 2000. I was only diagnosed after I was ordained. So like I did discern as an autistic person, obviously, but I didn't know I was autistic at the time I discerned, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's helpful for Ammo 9388. I do think that there are aspects, to discern, and it's a lot of it is finding where you can fit in, where you can help, and because discernment's on both sides. Because even like, for instance, my doctoral thesis, part of that was after I was diagnosed, it was talking to my superiors and saying, like, look, of the kind of ministries that we tend to do that would fit with the community mission, it would seem that a better option for me might be to go like more academic field, or writing direction. And for both those, the best thing to do immediately would be to do a doctorate. And so that's kind of what led me to my doctoral thesis, not just kind of like, oh, let's do a doctoral thesis. It was actually part of the discernment after I was diagnosed to say, well, what ministry would I be best at as an autistic priest? And in the same way, if you're discerning with the community has to say, the discernment is like you discern for the community also discerns, like, is this person right for this community? Because not everybody's right for every community. So, okay, so let's go to the questions in the AMA questions. Lawrence or whoever's reading them, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. All right. So we've got our first question from Riley. He's been one of our longtime parishioners. His question is very simply, what would you say is your favorite part about being a priest?
I think that there's a lot of things that are great. I think honestly, saying the Mass is wonderful every day. There's certain aspects that are great from time to time. I think confession is great, especially when you have a confession that's really transformative to somebody. I think also there's a lot of great things about being a religious too. Being in the community and all those types of things, which for me were kind of combined because I joined a religious community. I never went to the diocesan seminary. So I think those are the biggest things. I think a lot of things I like about our ministry as far as the intellectual aspects, but a lot of those type of things I could theoretically do as a layperson or as a religious brother, because almost no matter what ministry you have as a priest, a good portion of it can be done by somebody who's not a priest. Like the priest is organizing the parish festival. Well, the priest could just delegate that all completely to lay people if he really wanted to. So the next question.
All right. We've got from one of our fellow mods here, Gebs. She says that she has an Orthodox friend who asked the other day, why don't you give Holy Communion and Sacrament of Confirmation to babies like they do in the Orthodox Church? Why do they have to wait until they reach a certain age? If the reasoning is because they need to mature, how about those who have psychological disorders, as sometimes they, so to speak, age differently? How would you respond to this line of questioning?
Okay, well, I think the two sacraments, the kind of reasoning behind them is quite different. So historically, when the early church, the bishop would be the one to baptize and to confirm, but basically everybody. But as the church grew and it wasn't just in these cities where people could take the baby down to the bishop for baptism and confirmation, when a few weeks after the baby was born, and you had people out in the country that might be half a day's journey from the city on their farm or whatever, you start to have parishes and things like that. There had to be a decision made by the church, and the question was, are we going to center the confirmation or baptism on the bishop, or just have every priest basically delegated to do it? And a slightly different decision was reached in that. The Eastern Church in general wanted to keep those two sacraments together and just basically delegate every priest to do the confirmation and do it immediately. The Western Church decided, no, we want to focus on confirmation primarily being by the bishop. So except for an emergency, we're going to wait until kids are a little older, then have the bishop come once every year. Or historically, it wasn't even every year. Like you go to places like 100, 200 years ago, what would happen is the bishop would come through every 3-4 years, and all the kids in a certain range would be confirmed at that parish. And that was kind of to emphasize the episcopal aspect of that, to emphasize that the bishop did that. And that was the main reason it was kind of it was separated in the Western Church, was to emphasize that the bishop is the one who confirms, not just have confirmation for whoever. But even from when it was done, it was recognized that a priest could confirm an emergency, like if a 5-year-old hits his or her head and is like bleeding and might die, well, the local parish priest can confirm that 5-year-old, no problem. And that was the kind of idea of why confirmation. The interesting thing with communion is that in the Orthodox Eastern Church, you basically have like a first communion, and then they have second communion about the same time we have first communion, really. And so the question is how you want to do that as at different times in the Western churches being at different ages. But basically right now, the idea is you reach the age of reason. So you can know right and wrong. You can realize, okay, like this is a sin. And at that point you have confession. And then relatively soon after that, you usually have first communion. Usually a lot of parishes I know around, it's, maybe sometimes it's almost the same weekend. Sometimes it's 6 months different. Sometimes it's a year different. Just you have like 1 year catechism class is all about the sacrament of reconciliation. The next year it's all about the sacrament of the Eucharist. Either one of those, any of those work. But I think in that sense we kind of linked it to the sacrament of reconciliation or confession, whatever you want to say. I'm really fine with any of them: reconciliation, confession, penance. I'm not. I don't think it's worth fighting over that distinction. And so we kind of link the Eucharist to that in the sense of putting it at around the age of reason. And that's at least the practice in the West from Pius X. It used to be even older sometimes, like 10, 11 at times, which is not really the practice anywhere in the West today. So
Nice.
So
Okay.
somebody's saying here, I had my confirmation at 17 opposed to the usual 3 years the Latinos have, mainly because I wanted to do my confirmation of my own choice of Catholic rather than going through the motions. Happened down here in Miami. Well, yeah, that could be a case. Like, this is going to sound really embarrassing, but I did my confirmation a year later than most of my class when I was in school. So I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, which a few provinces in Canada have this thing that's going to sound really weird to you, which is publicly funded Catholic schools. So we have a Catholic school that's funded by the government, and how Catholic it is really depends on where you are. Like right now, the city of Calgary, its Catholic school is okay Catholic, but like the rural district right beside the city of Calgary is like a serious Catholic school. Like my sister teaches there; she's a teacher, and like the morning announcements are like something to read the Gospel of the day for the from the readings of Mass as part of the morning announcements. And like she teaches French and Spanish, and she's like, Los Cuatro Evangelios, that's perfectly fine for like, let's count to 4, like the 4 Gospels, Los Cuatro Evangelios. And I don't know what that is in French, quatre something, I evangelique or something like that. I don't remember exactly. And so that's but anyway, so with that, we had it in school, but we had like a meeting we had to go with our parish in 6th grade. And if you want to do confirmation in 6th grade, you had to go. And if you didn't do it in 6th grade, we had it as part of our like religion class in school. But if you didn't do that, or if you went to one of the public schools because of something special, like maybe you were in the like super elite band school, so which there's only one of in town and whatever. So you would have to go to a whole class the next year. And being like a 12-year-old, my dad got tickets to the Calgary Flames the same night as like this important meeting that we had to go to. And in hindsight, we probably could have like wiggled our way around, but my mom said basically like, okay, it's your choice. If you want to go to the Flames game, you're gonna have to like go to all the classes next year. And being like 10, 12 years old, I'm like, I'm going to go to the Flames game with Dad. so I end up doing like this whole set of classes, the following year to be confirmed with the kids who are a year younger than me in general. So, yeah.
Right.
So I don't know if that makes sense. It just shows that like we don't enter like people who are priests don't come out as like perfect angels from their childhood. Like for myself, I remember the other thing I remember about that is like we had first confession in the evening one day, like a weekday, and that day in school is the first time I remember getting in a fight at school.
Oh no.
And like I was in a fight in 2nd grade in school. Okay, like I'm not perfect. Like that 2 boys in 2nd grade had a fight in school is probably not like super surprising, but yeah, that's what I remember. So, anyway, so let's go on to the next question here.
All right. This comes from our resident Stoke, Tierno. Did the Vatican ever issue an official reply to the Ottaviani intervention? If yes, what did they say? And if no, why didn't it, in your opinion?
Um, the Ottaviani intervention. I'm not. I'm. Let me just double check what I think. Do you know what the Ottaviani intervention is supposed to refer to?
Um, I offhand do not. It looks like it's related to something to the SSPX, if I'm understanding
Well, yeah.
correctly.
So it's anyway. So the it's just like pulling up. It's a critical document on the new order of the mass and the change. I don't know. I'm not a liturgical theologian, and I haven't gotten into every little detail of it. I personally think my general idea is go to whichever mass that's nearby that helps you love Jesus more. And I'm generally for if one parish, if there's enough people in town to make one parish the charismatic parish, and one the Latin mass parish, provide that for people if it helps them love Jesus more, if it helps them grow in their faith. And so uh, I'm not super into all the details like that. I know myself. I know how to say Latin mass. I've said it a number of times. I've said the Anglican form mass a number of times. And things like that. So I know the different variations of the Roman Rite, but I don't know into those type of details.
Okay.
Yeah, I pulled up the same Wikipedia article. Somebody's posting the Wikipedia article, and I'm like, I just read the first paragraph of that quickly. But yeah, I don't. I'm not a. I'm not an expert onto like that kind of detail into the liturgy. Sorry, I mean that's not my forte, for lack for lack of a
No
better.
worries there.
For,
And I do want to remind everybody here that there may be some questions Father Schneider can't or won't be able to answer. And that's perfectly fine. Everybody has their wheelhouse. And, um, and that's okay.
Yeah,
Um,
just so somebody's the Anglican Ordinariate is based yeah. So one of my sisters and her husband are in the process of formally joining the Anglican Ordinariate at the moment. Uh, so if that so I am the oldest of four, and the other three uh, are all ladies. I was going to say young ladies, but the oldest one is probably not wouldn't be considered young too that much anymore. And all three are married with at least one kid. My youngest sister got married about a year ago and had her kid just in March, I think it was her first kid. He's like a little tiny. He's a little tiny cutie at this point. My other sisters have kids who are already in elementary school. So, anyways, but continue on with the questions here.
so from Sauron, we've got how was it to be in seminary as a person with autism? Did it influence your studies and bring specific difficulties?
So I definitely think it brought advantages and difficulties. Like one of the things that I notice myself is kind of like the the memory for details. Like I'm not always the best with short-term memory, but once it gets into my long-term memory, like it doesn't leave. And and that tends to be an autistic trait to have like these kind of like very detailed long-term memory like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like literally I took theology. I got my bachelor's degree in theology in 2006. I could probably still pass almost every exam from philosophy. Well, I shouldn't say almost every, but like a good portion of those exams I pass or maybe barely fail if I took those exams now 15 years later. I mean, that's just kind of a weird kind of memory thing. And that's part of why like I can appear like I know, like when people follow me online, like how do you know all this stuff? And it's like that's the kind of memory I have. That it's kind of like it's not kind of it doesn't work quite like other people. So there's advantages in that in the academic stuff. I do think that there are certain challenges in social things where in hindsight I'm like, that wasn't the greatest, and I didn't read social cues that well, and I probably kind of alienated a few people. at times, particularly in we do ministry out while in the seminary. Like, we start first, usually when we start in the novitiate, we're just doing, like basically teaching CCD once a week or things like that. But,
Mm-hmm.
and a few times there in hindsight in different things, I'm like, yeah, I missed a social cue there, or I missed this, or like I really kind of didn't do that well. Uh, you know, so yeah, so that's the that's so I think that there's different aspects like that. I think obviously, I think there are also advantages to kind of a religious thing, is that you have a certain discipline, you have a certain order, so you have certain things that are, expected. So like, uh, in a religious community, there's much more of kind of a kind of expected order of things. So it kind of simplifies social interactions a lot of times in a certain sense. Like, okay, like this is the expected thing to follow in the community. So hopefully that's helpful. Uh, so
All right. Um,
anyways, so what's the next question?
so from our resident nurse church, we've got what was going through your mind while prostrating for your ordination.
Uh, at the moment, to me, it's like this is gonna sound really bad, but I was just like, at the moment of the ordination, I was kind of like, okay, I was kind of thinking, what's next? Make sure I do everything right, like not make myself be a fool. And it really hit me more like in the day or two after, kind of the kind of spiritual thoughts of like, like being like in the retreat. We had an 8-day retreat beforehand, and just
Mm.
after. Whereas in the actual ceremony, maybe I was just like too nervous. I was just thinking about like, okay, what's next? What do I have to do right? Because I didn't want to be like the like I was ordained with 30 some, I forget exactly, 30 in the 30s. Uh,
Oh, wow.
well, because we had all of the legionary priests for the world. Well, most legionary priests for the entire world are usually ordained together in a class once a year. So it was like 30 some.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so so yeah, that's that's the hopefully that's helpful. Yeah, so anyways, like that was honestly the thought of my moment, and then it was like really, like it was really the profound gift of the priesthood, the profound gift of all the things that all the people helped me out and all those different things. So, and part of it might have been my nervous, which was like the day beforehand we had like we had like kind of a dress rehearsal, for lack of a better description, of the
Mm-hmm.
ordination, kind of like you might have for like a wedding rehearsal or something. And I messed something up, and then I'm like, and I felt like lightheaded after the rehearsal, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so maybe that was part of why I was at the day of it. I was just like, I was just thinking, okay, like, okay, what's the next to make sure I don't make any mistakes? Uh, more than like the deep spiritual things that a lot of people are thinking about. I know that that's, uh, I know that that's probably not the most profound answer, but I do think it was really what was going through my head. And it was really kind of the retreat beforehand, and then like the moments afterwards, it really helped me to say, okay, like this is a great grace. So
Nice. Well then, from our resident hamburger, Happy Arch, what are your thoughts on radical traditionalists that get upset with His Holiness anytime he tries to lay any groundwork for ecumenism, and what future groundwork for reunifying schismed or Protestant church bodies with Rome?
so I think that there's a number of other things with traditionalists there, where the radical traditionalists. I think we do have to look for ecumenism. I think the first group is really like the different Orthodox churches. It's really interesting in that the Orthodox, about like 3-4 years ago, had a split over Ukraine. I don't know if any of you follow like Orthodox church stuff, in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that like the Patriarch of Constantinople gave the Patriarch of Kiev autocephaly, which means like he becomes a patriarch, not just an archbishop, and he can basically manage his own church, the church of his nation, with relative independence, basically, and Moscow, who used to be over top of the Archbishop of Kiev, like broke communion with Constantinople over this, and a number in the Ukraine a number of people stayed with the Moscow Patriarchate. It was kind of complicated, but I do think that there is a possible unification with the with the with the with the what do you even call it? Possible unification with the Patriarch of Constantinople and the church under him, because really, right now, the only two really remaining issues are is the Pope first, or is he first among equals? Like, can the Pope declare ex cathedra, or can he only declare in a council or with the other patriarchs? And the issue of divorce and remarriage to a certain extent in that regard. Because the Vatican and Constantinople 20 years ago resolved the whole like filioque question, because the actual word proceeds from, we translate like, he proceeds from the Father and the Son. With the Father and the Son, he's worshipped and glorified. Well, the word proceeds in Latin and in Greek were different words that meant different things. And in Latin and Greek, using the word that they used, it would have actually been heretical to say he proceeds, using the Greek word, from the Father and the Son. You have to say he, because it's basically more like originates, because he originates. And whereas the Latin is more like he comes forth from. And so it's a different term, and there's a whole question there. So that's been resolved for 25 years or something. It was in the 90s they issued a joint declaration basically saying we've resolved this issue under John Paul II there. So and I do think that there are aspects you can do with ecumenism, but I do think with a lot of the Protestant groups, with things beyond like the Anglican ordinariate, or even if there was to make something like the Lutheran ordinariate, which would keep aspects of kind of like the liturgical Lutheranism, or something like that, could happen. But I do think that a lot of times right now, with how Protestants are going, there's a lot of other steps that need to be moved that we really can't resolve just relatively quickly, because they're just so far from us as far as like liturgical stuff, and so so anyway, so yeah. And somebody's asking, the SSPX will also become autocephalous then? Well, I mean, honestly, I'm not like personally, I'd be totally fine if basically the Pope said, okay, like, you see what we created for the Anglicans who want to become like the Anglican ordinariate? We're just going to copy paste that, but instead of like the Anglican rite, you're going to have like the extraordinary form, and it's going to be called, and we're going to put like the SSPX and the FSSP and the Institute of Christ King Sovereign Priest, and all those groups we're going to have, and you're going to have your bishop, and you can be religious communities in there. Like, because even in the Anglican ordinariate, there's like sisters there, and they're like in that under the ordinariate, and I don't know if I assume there's specific communities. I don't know all the details of that, but I do know that there are sisters in the ordinariate. So, and they're separate from like the sisters in the ordinary form. At least in somewhat separate. I don't know how, like, if there's Franciscan sisters there, well, obviously they share the Franciscan spirituality, but like, as you might know, you might have the Franciscan sisters in one city and the Franciscan sisters in the other city who really are completely like to have no common superiors. So yeah, and the hostility more on the Orthodox side would come substantially uniting. I would say oral, yes. I would say yes, especially when you get to like Russian Orthodox, even more than like the Greek and like the Greek Constantinople, like, for lack of a better term, Mediterranean Orthodox. Whereas the Russian Orthodox tends to be much more problematic as far as issues like that. Like the Russian Orthodox, I'm not sure on what grounds, but a lot of them don't believe that Roman Catholic sacraments are valid, and that just seems like, or at least let me preface this. They don't believe all Roman Catholic sacraments are valid. I think they believe baptism and things like that, but I don't think they believe like Roman Catholic ordinations and Eucharist are valid, which seems rather an odd position to take. I have briefly read the reasoning, but it didn't really make sense to me. But I just read like a brief summary. I'd have to go more in depth to understand it better. But
Mm-hmm.
so hopefully that's helpful. Um, I do think that we can sometimes also have tribes in the church where it's like anything the Pope says is wrong, or anything the Pope says or does is right. And the Pope is not. Like the Pope in his infallible statements is infallible, and his encyclicals is giving kind of a vision for the church. But like even the Pope has apologized for offhand statements that he said, you know what, this probably wasn't the best. Like he made some comment about like natural family planning, and his comment was along the lines of like, you don't have to, you know, Catholics don't have to breed like rabbits. Like you can responsible parenting might be that you only have 3 kids because that's what the mom can manage psychologically without going crazy. And something, and anyway, so like the breed like rabbits comment, even he like 3 days later he had to come out and say like I apologize, I really didn't mean that. That was not like that was on me. I made a mistake. And I think that that's you know if you have a pope who's going to be more ad-libbing like Francis is, I think it's definitely right to be out there and saying like I messed up. I was ad-libbing and it wasn't, and I came off in a way that I really shouldn't have. Whereas you have other popes like Benedict who's much more like like Pope Benedict was like the university professor who thinks through everything, and even if he's responding at the moment, he'd be like, you ask a question, he waits 30 seconds, he responds like in full paragraphs. So it's like he didn't really have as much of that issue, but that's more of a personality trait of the Pope, which is not good or bad in itself. Like
Okay.
so what's our next question? I love Red Fordman's joke here. If Nicola to pay Vatican papal infallibility, they had to be explained. Yes.
So our next question comes from one of our other mods here, Snails. She says, "Do you ever have to navigate social burnout? I'm on the spectrum and frequently find myself semi-nonverbal after a long social event, especially multiple events in a short period."
Well, yeah. I mean, I definitely do deal with that at times. I generally like in the last few years, I've been, relatively, we had we had COVID, which made people like more kind of in their house, and then I also had where I was we're writing a doctoral thesis, which is also more just like you know, uh, which is also more of being alone in our own house and things, and uh, so that can be a challenge as far as things. I do know myself, like if I go, like I do know like before my recent thing, I was working for like the communications department for our community, and like we had a big convention over the weekend, and like I was kind of in charge of a lot of running it, and it was work, but it was also like social aspects and things. And I had to basically prepare myself, but basically like the day before and the day after the convention, I was basically like, this is just relaxed days, 'cause otherwise I'm gonna be like, and then I do the 3 day convention. But like, uh, like I do realize that, and I think a lot of it is you start as you get older, and as you're consciously aware of it, myself as well, you're like, okay, like I know what my limits are, so I know what I have to do to protect myself around those limits. Like I just I don't know if any of you else go. Every year the Notre Dame has a really good ethics conference, moral theology. Any of you are more into that, you might have seen they just sent out the notice. Hey, here's our theme for the year. If you want to present a paper, here it is. And I presented that last year. I'll probably present something else this year. They have like 100 presenters, so it's not like I'm like super special in that sense. But anyway, so so but like that's like a 3 day conference, and there's a lot of social interactions. Like every meal, it's sitting with different people talking and things like that. But then like it's making sure beforehand and afterwards I have that time off, and then also just a lot of my social interaction for things like that tends to be on things that I'm more of my special interest. Like I could talk, if we're talking about the talking shop kind of thing, if we're talking about the actual like moral theology topics we're talking about, I could talk about that all day without burnout, because it's just like it's you know it's interesting for me. So but yeah, so I do have to deal with that. I do realize a lot of times you have to kind of plan for it and kind of know your limits and say like, okay, I realize like, hey, I got to stop here. A lot of people, it's like the first time you start drinking, you're like, the first time you have like, you have like one beer and you're like, okay, but then you realize 3 beers, okay, and you're like, ugh, you're kind of getting close to getting drunk. You're like, okay, now I know my limit is 3 beers. And so like, or 2 beers or whatever else it is for you personally. It's not 12 beers. Anybody who says that is, probably not being honest. But,
Mhm.
like some people it's 2 beers, some people it's 3, some people it's 4 over the course of an evening that they still feel like fully in control. But you kind of realize your limit by like going a little bit over, but not like way over in that sense. And I think knowing that with social burnout, you can work with that. So hopefully that's helpful.
Um, Before we get on to the next question, closely related, I think I've heard it once said that according to St. Thomas Aquinas, a man was allowed to get drunk once in his life, and after that, he should know his limits.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like what I would say in that sense, like in that sense. And this, like, social burnout is obviously not the same thing, but it's kind of that thing where it's like the thing in itself is not an issue. Like I can talk to somebody for half an hour without any problem. But you have to realize, okay, where's the limit?
Mhm.
Almost anybody of an adult size can have 1 beer without a problem. I mean, unless you're already like alcoholic where you have 1 beer and you can't stop. If you have like a physiological type addictive thing. But like, you have to realize, okay, where's the limit? And it's also sometimes you realize, okay, I'm getting close to the limit. It's like, or sometimes you realize like some people realize, okay, like I don't realize losing control at like 2 beers, but after 2 beers, it's really hard for me to stop drinking the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth beer, and then I'm totally lose control. So so I'm always just going to have one, wait an hour, because usually your body processes about 1 beer an hour, and then have
Mhm.
another one. So because if you go to like a sporting event that's 3 hours, you have like a beer basically at the start of every hour. You're usually going to be basically 100% sober by the end. You know, if you're watching like a hockey game and it's 3 periods, you have 1 beer per period, you're not really going to get drunk because the hockey game's 3 hours. You're not really going to have any kind of build up there. Anyways,
Mm. All right. Well, from Hedgehog Hokage, he says, "Hi, Father. I follow you on Twitter and love the perspective you share. What's it like being one of the most based Twitter users?"
I mean, I don't know. I just try and present the church's teaching, in the kind of context of today. I consider my Twitter feed as kind of like a running commentary on the world from the perspective of moral theology, for lack of a better description. Uh, in that sense, obviously I have other things I can talk about myself. I don't only post about that. I do post personal things sometimes, uh, and things. So, you know, I was mentioning the Flames. You can go back and like the last game the Flames had this year where they lost to the to the evil empire, the Edmonton Oilers. Uh, you can go back and if you look at my tweets during the game, I tweeted, 3 or 4 times, like, like things about like, because that was always my team as a kid. I
Mm.
don't nowhere near watching all the games. My dad watches much more than I do. Uh, but anyways, yeah. So I don't know. I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain it because like I never really set out to be like that. I kind of set out. I don't know if people know this, but like what happened was, so when I was a brother working on ministry, I ended up doing I was doing youth ministry as a brother. We usually do a few more years. Like most diocesan priests do like one pastoral year. Right now, we usually 2 to 3, like what we call internship, which is basically pastoral years between philosophy and theology. When I was there, we used to do 3 to 4. We've changed in the past 15 years since I was that stage of formation. But anyways, I ended up doing the 4, and I was working a lot in youth ministry. And the end of it, I ended up doing a lot to write the Conquest and Challenge books. I don't know how much they have kind of a 2-year rotation where it's relatively the same, but they do. But we, like me and a few other people, did a lot of the initial writing to set it all up. So I think that a lot of the books, if you look at the back, if you follow it, look in the back page on like the author's credit, I'm probably still in a lot of them. But anyways, so I was working on that while I was in Rome, but I also had other ideas while I was in Rome studying theology. I had other ideas about youth ministry things. So I started posting a blog. Nobody was reading it, so I'm like, oh, how do I do it? I should start a Facebook and Twitter to try and like share it. And just after that time was when Pope Benedict resigned. And I don't know if any of you have been around for like Twitter long enough. I started the Thanks Pontifex hashtag, which ended up going really big right around the end of Pope Benedict's reign, like the 28th of February 2013, I think it was, when he was, or 2012, when he retired, whichever one it was, 2012 or 2013. Anyways, I started going big then, and that's when I really started taking off on Twitter, and so that's kind of like and I just realized, oh, I guess I'm good at this. I'm like I'm getting all these followers and things. So anyways, yeah, we're at 50 minutes. We should keep going with the questions here.
Yeah. Next question comes from, and I've never known how to say his name. We're going to say Skiafa. How do you like your steaks cooked?
Medium rare, generally. Although honestly, I'm like when we would do it in I'm more a fan of sausage over steak. Like if we go to the restaurant and the option is to have like kielbasa or bratwurst or steak, I'll have the kielbasa or bratwurst.
Ooh, I like
so
that. I come from Wisconsin, and I appreciate a good bratwurst.
Yeah, so that's just personal taste, though. I mean, there's nothing wrong with steaks. I will eat steaks if that's what somebody cooks for the community. But if I'm like at a restaurant, I have a choice, I'll choose the bratwurst or the kielbasa over the steak. But anyways, so next question.
From Meep, we have, how do you teach RCIA, and what type of person is usually attending?
Well, I think so you teach RCIA. It's really kind of like a summary of the faith to try and do over a year or two. I personally never taught it. So one of my brothers-in-law was not Catholic, and he started RCIA when he was engaged to my sister. And so he went through it, and my dad was actually a sponsor. But I don't know all the details in that. I do know it's basically a summary of the faith. I've never taught it myself. Like I've taught CCD, so it's like, so that's so let's keep going. I want to make sure we get a chance to get to some of the other questions. I'm going a little faster now just because I realize, we still have a lot of questions, and I don't want to be here for hours and hours.
No question from Draconius. He just wanted to say God bless you and tell you he's praying for you. Let's see if I can. This is kind of a longer question from Red Florida Man. He says that he's also someone who's autistic. And his primary question is, how much should autistic people expect in terms of reasonable accommodation in church, in life, and relationships with others? And how much should those not like us, so neurotypicals, go out of their way to ensure we are as welcome and cherished as we reasonably can be without detriment to themselves?
Yeah, so I do think there's a whole question there that we have to work with, and I think obviously you're trying to charity is both like helping people out, but also like not like trying to work with yourself. So you're not just being you're not being a stick in the mud or whatever. Like you're trying to help out, so you try and meet halfway or part way. I do think certain things can be helpful for autistics and for others. Like one of the things is a number of parishes started doing basically like one of the masses, basically reverse the cry room. So the cry room is like usually it's like the crying babies and it's kind of soundproof, but for one mass, you basically turn down the lights in there, turn down the volume, and then if autistic people or old people who have trouble hearing or anybody else who just doesn't want it like the mass that loud, doesn't want to hear, as doesn't want to hear all the kids, dropping Cheerios on the pew behind them, the 3-year-old, because mom's giving them Cheerios during mass, which if they're 3, I don't really have an issue with that. If they've gotten like just to grade school, they should be preparing for first communion. But a 3-year-old, well, whatever, they're eating Cheerios during mass. I'm not complaining. Things, or asking like questions to their mom and dad. Little kids of different ages, or things like that. And those type of things can be easily accommodations. And like one of the things I have on my website, I think I might have mentioned it, on the top menu is a sensory friendly mass directory. And part of my goal there is for every kind of like significant metro area in the US to have one a week would be my goal. So like one parish somewhere in the Cincinnati or or St. Louis or Denver or Atlanta area has a mass for the people who need that sensory sensitivity, right? you know but then also on the other side, like, hey, like we need to be accommodating even in ordinary masses. Like, maybe this one autistic kid just like he just runs around, like he can't sit still during mass or something, and it is, he's a little, and there is kind of a sense that everybody should be accommodating to others in their particular needs, as long as they're not being malicious about it, like, and a little kids, it's more obvious, like they're not being malicious about it, like obviously if somebody's like an adult and then they're just like, and they talk to it and it seems normal, and then they're just running around the church during mass, you're like, okay, what's going on? But if like the 3-year-old is running around the church during mass, you're like, okay, he's a 3-year-old. Like that's not like a complete unexpected thing for 3-year-olds to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the autistic kid is still doing when he's 5, but it's not like, but you realize when you talk to him that like it's not that he's doing it intentionally to try and be like an obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think there's a lot of accommodation we can do that is valuable there in general, for others accommodating us. But we should also like avoid being like just like it has to be my way and everybody has to accommodate me 100%. And even like in my little things, it's kind of like meeting halfway, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And before we get on to the next question, I'm being told by the man in my ear that while we want to be respectful to your time, you feel free to go as long as you want on this AMA. So if you've got extra time to do on this, feel free to go do so. Anyways, our next question comes from Amogus. He says, I know this is a very broad question, but what can be the first step in deepening one's knowledge of Catholic theology? What fields could one explore as a beginner? Our academic year has just ended, and I'm looking for ways to spend the time I have for vacation productively.
Okay. Well, I think that there are different levels, and there are different kind of things that help at different levels. As odd as it seems, honestly, if you're just kind of like coming to it and you don't remember your CCD from when you were a kid and things, Catholicism for Dummies is actually a pretty good like intro guide. As much as people are like the For Dummies series can be a little cheesy at times, but the Catholicism for Dummies is actually a pretty decent introduction. And then once you go on beyond that, there's a lot of good books like Father Harrison Ayer's Mysterion is a good book, kind of like the next level. I wouldn't recommend it quite to somebody who, like, if you don't remember your basic CCD at all, don't go for Father Harrison's book. And there's a lot of other books as far as prayer and things like that. And I do think that one of the things we often think about is can often do is just think of Catholicism just as an intellectual activity, and then just think of prayer as like, oh, I say the Our Fathers and Hail Marys, but the deeper prayer is really that communion with Jesus, that talking to Jesus. And there's a lot of books that have different things that can really be helpful in that, whether it's, I really like Father Frederick Faber. He's not the most well known, but you do have a whole bunch of other spiritual authors. They're out there. Father Thomas H. Green is really good. Reminds me of blank now. He wrote a bunch of books on discernment. I'm forgetting his name now. There's another one, and there's a number of books there to really go deeper in prayer, because I do think that's one of the areas we can kind of neglect, is to go prayer beyond just kind of like I say my Our Fathers, to really kind of I meditate, I communicate with Jesus. I have the daily devotion where I read the Bible or something, and so that would be another thing I would say. Another book that I could recommend that really helped me but might not help everybody else is Kreft and Ticelli wrote the Handbook to Christian Apologetics, and I guess they just wrote they wrote a updated one, the Handbook to Catholic Apologetics. I have not read it, but I presume it's probably just a variation on it, and it's very much like a philosophy book almost, because it's like the first chapter is like basically basic philosophical principle, and the second chapter is like, does God exist? Here's 25 proofs that God exists. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so if you're the type of person who actually thinks that might be interesting, it is a really good book. If you're the type of person who says like, that doesn't sound interesting, don't worry. That's not the book that's for you. There's other books out there. So hopefully that's helpful for among us.
All right. From Potato Cream Soup, he says, I personally struggle greatly with opening up to others that are not Christian about my faith, and I really wish I didn't, as I know that I have missed opportunities to share because of my awkwardness about faith. What advice would you give me as I try to open up more about my faith?
Yeah, that's well. I think the biggest thing is the first way we evangelize in that sense is through the example, because honestly, like if you see those people on the street corner who are just angry and mad and just like "Rah, rah, rah, rah," like how many people are going to be attracted to Jesus through that? Where if it's like, hey, you have a beautiful family, you're living in the faith and everything else, it's going to be attractive. So if you mention something, it's like, oh, like I'll actually like think about that, and maybe it will help my life out. And I think that a lot of times is kind of the kind of the kind of looking for those opportunities to bring it up, not to be like, you must believe in Jesus, but to see like, oh, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, I'm going to go to mass, or I'm going to go to this retreat or something like that. And to those type of things can be the kind of that start of a discussion or something, uh, because I think that doing it in that way, it's kind of your own personal testimony. It's not so much like, this abstract reasoning. Like I just talked about Crouch Shelley's abstract reasoning book, and that can be helpful for some people, like sure, and it was really helpful for me, but it's not going to be helpful for everybody. And a lot of people are more moved by, hey, like the moment might be like you mentioned, oh, I'm going to go to mass, and we have the missionary priest this week, who's coming to talk to us about the missions in Africa or something, and then maybe they're like on Monday, they're like, hey, what was the missionary priest talking about? And yeah, he talked about how these people were starving, and he showed us these photos and things like that, and he showed us how that they're building this school to help the young people, so they can move up in society, and they can move beyond just being subsistence farmers and things like that. And something like that is really, is more attractive a lot of times than like, you must, believe in Jesus directly. It's kind of looking for those opportunities, not to say that I never shared, but to look for the opportunities where it's kind of like, it's something personal I did, or something personal I'm going to do, that kind of relates to faith, that can be the start of a discussion, and not kind of like a super awkward kind of like, I'm bringing my faith from left field, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully, you know, so 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 anyways, hopefully that's helpful.
Righty. Here we've got kind of a more fun question from Cygnus. Asks, how could a cowboy ride into town on Friday, stay 2 days, and then ride out on Friday?
The same way my dad can ride out on his Case IH and then ride back to the farm on his Case IH. You know, the Friday is the name of his horse or his tractor or something.
Mm.
So I know the
From
stereotypical answer is the horse, but some farmers name their tractors too. So
ah,
I forget my dad's name, but he actually has names for his tractors. I just call them the Case IH because that's like the brand name on it. IH is a International Harvester. Case and
right.
IH like merged. If you're in the farm area, you would know that, but just
Yeah.
you know, they're pretty. That's a pretty big band of farm tractors. So, anyways,
Yeah.
so Boss Roach's question.
Yep. He says, uh, do you know about the LARCH program for adults with developmental disabilities? And if so, what are your thoughts on how that type of model can contribute to both abled and disabled people learning faith together?
I think
And do you think this is necessary in our church?
I think it's helpful. I think it's helpful for those it helps. I don't think that like I think it's one of those things where it's like it's very helpful for certain people and it's good to have the option, but I don't think like it's the answer for everybody, if that makes sense. Um, I recently wrote a review of I Believe in You, I think is the name of the book. It's by the guy who runs Larch in Chicago, or I don't think he runs it. He's involved with Larch in Chicago and really on disabilities and things. And I thought it was a very good book, and I think a lot of the kind of aspects are good, even with the kind of recent things that came out about Jean Vanier in that regard that are not so pretty. Because Jean Vanier was the founder. Um, so anyway, so that that's that's a whole question of that I do think that could be helpful, but I don't think that like that's the only answer. Like everybody has to go into this. I think sometimes we can be very too much like, oh, this is a good answer, therefore this is the answer for everybody, and it's not. I mean, it's like, if praying the rosary every day helps you, great, but every Catholic has to pray every day. They don't have to pray the rosary. If they're like, hey, I get more out of reading a chapter of the Bible and reflecting on it for 15 minutes and spending those 15 minutes praying the rosary, great. Like, you're praying, you're communicating with Jesus. You're doing it in a very a way that I have like zero questions about like the orthodoxy of it or anything. So so I think that could be helpful. And I do think that model can help people who are like that. I do think you also see a lot in Henry Nouwen, because he ended up living with Larch for the last part of his life, and you can kind of see a little bit of his spirituality in there. So I do think there are aspects that can be very helpful, but I don't think we should be like, this is the solution for all disabled people. It should be an option for them, but you know, even if they're so disabled they aren't able to really like hold down a job or anything, they can usually express like, do you want to be here, and like type out on an iPad or something like, no, I want to go back to the group home I was at, or something. And that's this other group home where I want to be here in Larch. That's fine. I mean, so hopefully that's helpful.
All right.
So Madeline.
Madeline asked, well, first she says that she wanted to say you do amazing work on your social media pages, spreading the gospel and evangelizing. And she read your page on your website and read that you were diagnosed with autism in adulthood. Could you describe a bit about that experience? How did it feel being diagnosed, and what was it like moving forward from that point?
Okay, I'll do so. If anybody, I don't know if anybody heard it. I was trying to hide it, but I had just opened up my like seltzer water. I have like Lidl seltzer water. I don't know. Lidl's like a discount grocery store. That's where you go. It's but anyway, so just for my vocal course here. So what happened was, so my first assignment as a priest was to be chaplain for a K through 12 school. And I made a few mistakes that I knew about in my first year, and I thought, like, it's kind of the mistakes that are within the realm of, like, it's my first year, I'm learning. I hope you don't expect, like, somebody, like a new priest who's, like, first year chaplain of school to make 0 mistakes, because, like, that's not a reasonable expectation. But then at the end of the year, like, you know what? It's like, we don't think you're reading the social cues well. We don't think it's a good fit for you. Why don't you look at something else? So that was kind of the first. Then why don't you look at, like, maybe you have Asperger's or something like that. And then uh, anyway, so I actually went to one psychologist. He really didn't. In hindsight, he really didn't do any tests that were really specific for autism when I asked him about it. But people in the community said, "Hey, why don't you try another psychologist?" I went to the second one, and she really did a lot of tests that are much more kind of, like, looking at it in hindsight, are much more related to autism, and much more kind of a diagnostic test that can tell you about autism, rather than the ones he did, which were just very general psychological tests. So, like, I had to go in, I think, 3 afternoons for like 3 hours each time or something like that, and do a whole bunch of tests. Things like, here's a picture, write a story about it, or answer all this set of questions, or things like that. Did the Rorschach test as part of it, you know, um, which is really interesting because autistic people actually tend to do the Rorschach test rather oddly. So I don't want to ruin it for too many people, but the idea of the Rorschach test is your subconscious, but, like, because it's kind of abstract things, but autistic people tend to be, like, very literal about it. So it's like, what is this? And I'm like, it looks like an elk. And, like, and it's like, that's the closest thing I can think about. And it's like, what does that have to do with subconscious? I don't know. It just looks like an elk. Uh, so anyways, so, yeah, so that was in late 2015, and then early 2016, January 2016, I actually went in, went and got the diagnosis. And at first, I was very kind of disappointed, very kind of worried. I'm like, oh, like, kind of thinking, oh, I'm a disaster and things like that. But I really said, okay, well, I'm gonna read up on this, find out what's different. And as I read up, I really started to realize, okay, like, this is really what I'm like. This is really, really helpful to understand a lot of what's gone on in my life. And I have, like, literally, like, I probably read, like, I probably measure it more in feet, like 5 feet of a bookshelf of autism books in the last, like, since then, in the last 7 years or something like that. Maybe not 5 feet, but, like, a pretty decent volume of it. And actually, like, in that reading, one of the things I started noticing is that there was, like, almost nothing that's, like, religious from an autistic perspective, because the things I could find that were religious were, like, moms praying about their autistic kid, which, is great, and things like that. But that's not really, like, prayer for autistics, which really led me to my book, which is coming out this week. Even back, like, in 2016, 2017 timeframe, I started thinking about the details of a book like that. So anyways,
Okay.
so next question from Ark.
Yeah. He asks, which doctrine of the Catholic faith invoked the most resistance from you when you learned about it? Did you overcome it, and if so, how?
That is a tough question, not because I'm trying to think of, like, a doctrine that provoked, like, a ton of resistance from me. Like, that wasn't just, like, it wasn't relatively easy to overcome, because I went a little astray in my teenage years. I wasn't, like, super Catholic and things, but once I realized it, I kind of you know I never really had any huge difficulties with any of the doctrines. Uh, you know, uh, I can't think of any that, that were really, like, difficult for me. So let's go on to Eddie Wow's question.
Okay. Um, What does being an autistic priest help you in any way in your ministry as a priest?
Okay. And so I think it can in kind of memory and things like that. It can be and it can with other autistic people, because as much as there's like a difficulty in understanding social interaction between autistic people and neurotypical people, like non-autistic, not
Not
neurotypical is
ADHD.
generally like non-autistic or non-ADHD or a few other conditions as well, but like 95% of the population, um, is that we're not picking up each other's social cues, but often autistics can pick up other autistic social cues almost as well as neurotypicals can pick up other neurotypical social cues. So it's really interesting. There's some really interesting research in the last 5 years or so that's really like broken groups up, like all autistic, all neurotypical, and then like mixed, and realized it's the mixed one where there's the issues. The all autistic one actually performs as far as like reading social cues basically as well as the all neurotypical one. Maybe it's like whereas there's an issue in the mixed group, both directions. And so I think in that regard, there is a lot of ministry to autistic people that can be helpful, and things like that. And as well with the memory things I talked about beforehand and other aspects, I think although I don't like stereotypes, I think really like there's kind of a there's kind of an autistic stereotype of the nutty professor, the guy who's like totally into his field of study and just can like lose track of time and things. And really, like to a large extent, I can be like that with theology at times. So it's like, so that's where we can, in that sense. So, and obviously, I'm, you know, on the higher end of IQs if I'm getting a doctoral thesis. I'm not like, even among like my community, they're not going to send me to a doctoral thesis if I can, barely pass theology. So, so hopefully that's helpful. And then Eddie was asking about the Legionnaires of Christ. So really what led me to Legionnaires of Christ was that so the Legionnaires of Christ is part of Regnum Christi, which is like a wider kind of movement, lay people and consecrated lay people as well, uh, and things. So somebody I knew back in Calgary had tried out the consecrated lay woman branch for like a year or two, and she was really involved in it. I knew other people who were involved in Regnum Christi at the time who really seemed like a model of what the kind of Catholicism that I was attracted to. So when I felt the call of the priesthood from John Paul II, listening to John Paul II, I kind of had like, okay, I need to go and visit the diocese. I need to go and visit the Legion because I see all these people who are, into Regnum Christi who are very active, who kind of give me a kind of sense that like this is the kind of Catholicism that attracts me. And maybe I'll visit another community or two. I'll send out a note, send out one of these kind of like fill out this, and everybody. It's not as much now, but like back in the day, it was like you could fill out a little thing at the back of the church with your name on it and send it to like one address, and then like every community in the country would send you promotional material, like every religious community in Canada, or so I got everything. The other one that actually like seriously considered visiting. I never actually visited because their seminary was so far, but and I already decided for the Legion was like the first thing that came out was like, oh, the Pope just beatified like this missionary who died from our community. And that was like the first sheet that came out of their promotional pack. I'm like, okay, well that's like a serious thing that I can understand. And but anyway, so and then I visited Legion. I just kind of like, for lack of a better term, like fell in love at first sight, visiting the Legion. And obviously I wasn't like ready. Oh, I'm going to be ordained based on this, but that was enough to like one visit for the weekend was enough to say, okay, I'm going to come here for the school year. And then over the process of the next few years, I kind of like discerned. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is gonna be my life. So FDAF, however you pronounce that, FDAF. I don't know how to pronounce their name.
I think most of us here pronounce it FDAF. uh, he says, I want to ask a question about how to approach my cousins who support abortion. how do I approach them charitably? Because usually when I evangelize, I go in all guns blazing, and when I speak truth, I do so not caring if a person gets offended, especially when I've gone through arguments with some family members about it, like how Jesus's words will divide the family. I got this way because no matter the tone I go with or how charitable I go and holding back what I genuinely think and holding back the truth, and at that point, I don't feel like myself. But now, how do I speak the truth in a charitable sense? Because I do evangelization with such passion.
Yeah, well, I think there can be a challenge in that, and I think a lot of it depends a lot on where different people are coming from, because uh, you know, like I know an extended family and friend circle, like my extended family is not all like super Catholic. My immediate family is all Catholic, like they all go to mass every Sunday, but like once you get beyond like people who descend from my mom and dad, you know, the Catholicism is weak or non-existent or things. And the difference between kind of like people who are just kind of like going along with the flow and people who are like activists, for lack of a better term, because I think sometimes the activists you're going to have a tough time turning them in, and you almost do have to be like that confrontational. But most people aren't the activists, uh, and so I think a lot of it is to try and one of the things I would think is a good thing to say, like, okay, once a baby's born, like, you know, I think we agree that we can't kill that baby, right? Like, yeah, I think we agree, right? Well, I mean, if that baby could be born and still survive, it probably couldn't be killed, right? Like, yeah, okay, so viability. But what's like the difference between like that one day and the other day, you know? And to see where they are, because I do think if you start looking at the surveys, like 2/3 of Americans support banning second and third trimester abortions, which is not by no means a perfect Catholic thing, but it would be definitely an improvement from where we are now, and even if I don't convince them 100%, like, okay, we should ban all abortions, if I convince them to move it back to say, okay, we should ban abortions after 12 weeks or something, or after 15 weeks, like then it's like, okay, well, I've helped move them in the right direction. Maybe I didn't get everything, but sometimes it's step by step. Like right now, the law before the Supreme Court is Mississippi, which is 15 weeks, which is actually supported by the majority of Americans. By like 2/3 of Americans support banning abortion by 15 weeks. They try and do like, we don't have 2/3 supporting banning all abortions, because I do think a lot of people have a significant portion have kind of this idea that, like, maybe at a heartbeat or maybe at like the first brain waves or something like that, that's when you kind of have enough sense that you're like, okay, this is a person, and exactly where that is, it varies a lot. But when they do ask like first, second, third trimester, the majority support legal abortion the first trimester. Unfortunately, we should try and change that, but that's unfortunately the reality. About a third supported in the second trimester legal abortion, and about 12% support in the third trimester. Yet, like, and you can see that reflected in other developed nations' laws, because with the exception of Canada, which is unfortunately even worse than the U.S., most like developed countries have a ban in that range about the end of the first trimester, 11, 12, 15 weeks, somewhere in there. It varies a lot country to country, but usually around then is when they start when abortion after that point is banned in most countries. In most developed countries, say, I don't know, like every kind of like, North Korea is not banned at any point, but I don't think North Korea is a model anybody wants to follow for any kind of legal things. Whereas I do think like Germany or Great Britain or Italy, people might say like, okay, yeah, like that's, and that's one thing to think about too. Like even, to think about how extreme American laws are compared to like European laws on abortion. Because I do think that if in the next, in the next 3-4 weeks, we have what is expected from the Supreme Court, and it's sent back to the states, we're going to have a wide variety of laws state by state. Because you're going to have states that it's still legal all 9 months without exception. You're going to have other states that it's, completely illegal. I think you're going to have a bunch of states where it's going to be these like, okay, it's banned at 12 weeks or 15 weeks or things like that, or at the heartbeat, like in Texas, which is about 6 weeks. And and we'll have a lot of like local debates about those type of things, and it will be an election issue, so it's something you can do with that. So I do think also that like politics sometimes is the realm of the possible. There's kind of like, like we shouldn't just be like, you know, like super idealistic and say like this is the ideal government, therefore we're going to do nothing unless we get the ideal. No, that's not how politics works. So hopefully that's helpful. So camo.
I think you sort of answered this question earlier, but if you want to reiterate on it, feel free.
Okay.
Camo asks, I'm sorry if this question was answered in your book, but how has autism affected you becoming and being a priest? And has there been any negative aspects because of it?
Yeah,
He
I think
says
we've
he's
already kind of like that. That's kind of. I think you're right that's pretty much already covered. So username usernamos nodiamus. I don't know how to.
yeah, username is no idea is. Um, he says, "Hello, Father Schneider. How can we bring those close to us who have fallen away from the faith back into it?"
Well, I think the first thing is I think I can only really speak of general principles because each person is different. You have to ask why they went away from the faith. Like, do they have like a struggle with something intellectually? Do they just want to uh, commit sexual sins that the church doesn't approve of, and that's more important for them than being Catholic? Or what's the reason that they've fallen away from the faith? Are they scandalized by something? And so I think it's to look at that specific issue, but I also think it's always invite, and never force it down their throat. It's like, at least when they're adults. I have no issue with like parents saying like, you live in this house, uh, you're 14 years old, you live in this house, you're going to mass. That's what we do as a family. But like if your kids are 20 years old, it's like, well, and they live on their own, it's like, well, you can invite them to mass, you can invite them to something, you could present them with things that are good with the faith, but not be like, you must be Catholic, otherwise, like this is gonna be, you're gonna, everything's gonna be bad, uh, like I, uh, and so in that sense, it's those are the kind of things where, you know, uh, so hopefully that's helpful. Those are kind of principles. So
All right.
burger.
Uh, Burger asks, "What kind of burger, if you like any, do you like?"
Well, I mean, like mushroom Swiss burgers are really good. I definitely like a good hamburger. Like mushroom Swiss, if they're looking that type. Five Guys is good. They're not like of kind of the big chains are probably the best. They're not better than a lot of like local places I you know of.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like I've been probably one of the best burgers I had was I was a few years ago, I was covering all the masses for a weekend for a priest in rural West Virginia, because he was out, he was on his vacation or something. So I was out like just basically staying in like his guest room and like covering all the masses. And look, here's $20 for dinner on Saturday night. Just figure it out. I like, I'm not gonna, I have my diet and I don't want to be like, it's easier. So I just went to like the local place. It was like, it was like, and ordered like a burger and a beer for, and it was like I was sitting there at the bar watching college football with some other guys, and after Saturday mass, and eating this delicious burger and things. So, anyways, Steven or whoever that's supposed to be with all those fancy characters.
Yeah, I think it's Steven. What do you think about the current lack of ascetic values and logic in North America, and is there a path forward?
So the lack of ascetic values, I think, I think that there that is something we should try and get back. I do think, for example, really, like even just simple things like the Friday fish or the Friday no meat, um, and things like that. But I also think just kind of, I do think that there is something of value that I really learned entering religious life in the Legion, with that offered up, it's like, oh, it's tough. And the ascetic doesn't need to be like some kind of like, well, I'm wearing a hair shirt or, oh, I'm like, this or that. I just remember like one time when I was a brother working out in the field, and I was at a like a Dawson youth event, like they have, where they have like the kind of like performers and you know and a bunch of stands. They have like a youth event one Saturday or Sunday a year, and they have anyway. So I was there, and this one they had it on like the seminary grounds and things like that, and they had a vocations tent, and I was there just standing up and greeting everybody all day. And it's not easy to be standing up, like that many hours constantly, like greeting, and but you just offer that, even that little thing up as a sacrifice. And like even one of the other sisters or brothers nearby, because there's like each one had our own table, each religious community, like how did you do it? Because we were just like, we had to sit down, we had to like basically like kind of be here but not be focused on like greeting people part of the time. And it's just like, I was just offering it up. I was just offering up to say like, okay, I'm going to try and hopefully help one of these people help discern their vocation today, whether it's the Legion or to the diocese or to some other community. So, uh, so, so anyways, uh,
Okay.
so we have capitalism,
Yep.
Celticon, something.
Yeah. Celticom Corp. Any desire for the episcopate?
No, not at all. I personally like, like I have zero desire for the episcopacy. Episcopacy. Um, I want to teach theology as like a theology professor or something like that. I'd be glad doing that. Uh, I really don't think I'd be good at it, a lot of the kind of like managerial stuff like that. I think I'd be a particularly, just the autism and things. That's one area of like, like where a bishop would have to be even more than a lot of priests, that I wouldn't be great at. Or even like, like a lot of Dawson priests where they have to be a pastor and managing like a parish with, like, especially with a school, and you got like a staff of like 30, 40 people at that point, 50 people at that point, and it can get really complicated. Whereas, you know, I'd much rather, like, I don't think I do great at those aspects of like a lot of priests and especially bishops' jobs.
Okay.
So anyway, so Woody.
Woody asks, well, starts out by saying, I've always been a big admirer of the Legionaries of Christ. ECYD was a big part of my childhood. My question is, what is your favorite part of being a legionary?
Oh, anyways, just before I get to there, I see one question here. I've literally never heard a priest say he wants to be a bishop. Well, he who should be beatified, Fulton J. Sheen, did want to be a bishop. So, uh, you know, that is, he did say that. And and there's other cases where it's very it's relatively evident that certain priests are looking up to be bishops, when they're kind of in positions like running seminaries or vicar generals or things like that. I don't want to do any of that. I want to teach. I want to be like the theology professor, and things like that. But anyway, so being a legionary, my favorite part of being a legionary, I think really a lot of it is the priesthood, but then also just like the community life and and really that kind of. I think there's a lot of good spiritual aspects, as far as prayer and things like that. One thing I noticed for us versus a lot of other communities, for example, is we put a little more emphasis on the kind of like the mental prayer. Like we have an hour of mental prayer a day, just like meditation. A lot of other religious will have half an hour, but then they'll have like other prayers that are longer. So it's not like we pray more. It's like we focus on this aspect of prayer more. Not so. This is not at all a critique of other communities. Like so we'll pray the breviary in private, just and just saying it, and other communities will sing it, and it will take like, they'll focus on the breviary much more, and they'll chant it, and it will take, like 3 times as long. And that's their spirituality. But for us, I think there's a lot of aspects like that are very nice. Like I'm definitely like very much devoted to the Sacred Heart, for example. I'm just looking up from my laptop here, and I have a few my desk. I have a few pictures on the wall here in front of me. It's like my family. Well, each of my it's a picture of me and my parents, then of each of my siblings and their family, and then the Sacred Heart and an icon of Our Lady of Czestochowa, actually. So, and it's a print of Our Lady of Czestochowa, I should say. It's not an actual icon. It's a print. So I think those type of things are helpful. So with third Doyen.
With Thrudoine. What are the church's rules for developmentally disabled adults marrying? I was wondering, since I've seen stories of 2 adults with Down syndrome marrying, and I'm not sure when one is considered able to consent to a marriage. Are there other mental conditions that would prevent a valid marriage?
So there are a number of mental conditions that prevent a marriage. You have to be able to understand the basics of like what's involved in marriage. So I would think that a lot of it you have to do on a case by case basis. There's no like condition that 100% people who have this condition are unable to marry. But like, for example, Down syndrome, depending on how much you're able to understand, you might be able to understand enough that you can fully consent to what marriage involves, or you might not be able to understand that much. That's it's not like it's not kind of a binary. It's kind of one of those things that, okay, we have this issue, that we have this point that may be an issue. Let's go through it and see whether you're understanding, like, okay, marriage means you're just with this person, means, you're expected to have sexual relations with this person. You're expected to, stay with this person for life, things like that, and like you can ask them a number of questions to make sure they're understanding that, and they're really fully aware and consenting to it. There's a few other psychological conditions that can be obstacles. For example, narcissistic personality disorder can be an obstacle because the person is unable to really give themselves in the way that marriage properly needs to be. A psychological condition that creates a permanent and unmedically treatable impotence. Part of being able to marry is being able to physically perform the marital act, the motions of the marital act, for lack of a better description. So there's that, but that's not usually a psychological. That's usually more physiological. If it's permanent, psychological is more temporary. That can be treated and you're free to marry at that point. And it's not grounds for annulment if it's temporary or just passing or something. Those are kind of things. There's a few other conditions that might be, if people can't understand it, or they're so kind of caught up that they're unable to really give a free consent, that there can be issue.
Okay.
So anyways, let's go on. Erdogan.
Erdogan Alt asks, on the boat, my mother who was Catholic talked about the Immaculate Conception. My dad and his friends who are Protestant expressed their doubts. So I ask you this, how would you convince a Protestant about the Immaculate Conception?
Well, I think the basic understanding is the same that it would be, that's really being described, throughout history, in the sense that like that God has the choice of anything he can have, anyone he can be, he can have as his mother. So he's going to pick the most perfect one. He's going to pick the one that's, that's beyond perfect. He's not going to pick one that's kind of stained in that sense. And he has the ability to do that. So why not? I mean, I don't, like, even if you look at like St. Thomas Aquinas was wrong in the Immaculate Conception. people who think that Thomas was right and everything. No, he wasn't. Even the church has said so. But if you look at Thomas Aquinas on the Immaculate Conception, what was Thomas thinking? And his idea was, well, like redemption is after the Mary's conception, so like, but Duns Scotus said, well, like God is seeing outside of time, so he can apply those graces preemptively, knowing that that Jesus will die on the cross and rose from the dead and save us all, and preemptively apply those all to Mary's soul at her conception. So hopefully that's helpful. I'm sure other people can explain that one better than I can.
All right. Docky asks, I'm wondering what your take on the liturgy divide in the churches, Novus Ordo and the Latin Mass. What do you personally think we could do to ease the tensions between the two groups?
I think there's a number of things. I think if there's enough people who want it, I'm totally supportive of any bishop providing a parish where you have it, or whether inviting the FSSP in or somebody else or something like that, because it's just like, if that's going to help them love Jesus more, and it's not in itself a problem, why not? And I think also, there's a lot of elements where I think there was kind of a sense of like, let's do the ordinary form as far away from how it used to be before the liturgical change after Vatican II, as opposed to trying to be like a kind of hermeneutic of rupture, where it's kind of like, this is like a new liturgy, and I think that really added to a lot of the difficulties. Whereas if you say, okay, this is a continuation of this liturgy in this regard, and there's certain changes that happen, but we're not just like creating a new liturgy out of nothing. I mean, if you look at the parts of the mass, I mean, it's very much like do 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 do. I mean, there are a few changes in the sense of like, the prayers at the foot of the altar before, like kind of before mass, that used to be said before every mass, kind of in the, like in front of the congregation, are not said. They're kind of now, but and some of the prayers, like the Confiteor, is shortened. The offertory is slightly changed. A second reading is added, because in the extraordinary form, usually, even on Sundays, usually just have one reading in the gospel. But especially if you use Eucharistic prayer 1, it's you can see a much more continuity there. And even with the other Eucharistic prayers, it's not meant to be like a rupture. It's meant to be a kind of modification. So hopefully that's helpful. So Austria is 2401.
Yes. Father, I've asked many people how to evangelize in high school, and the common consensus is let people come to you. What would be the appropriate way to get people to talk?
Are you still there? Did I lose you?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, you just
Okay.
on my audio you cut out there, like at the end. So I have it on my phone just beside the computer here, so
Okay.
I'm looking at that. So I think like I said beforehand, is to really live it yourself, and then bring it up naturally when it's kind of like something is happening. Like, it's like, oh, what are you doing this weekend? Oh, my youth group is going down to feed the homeless. Oh, okay, like that's a starting point to talk about it, and not just kind of like, hey, we're going to talk about religion, but especially if you're doing activities and it's like, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Or hey, can you come to the party? No, I already agreed to go down and, like, serve the homeless people on Saturday night, so sorry, I can't come to the party. That's all. You can't come to the party, like, you're really going to go and serve the homeless people? Yeah, I think that's really helpful. That they really struggle on Saturday nights because everybody wants to be with family or with parties. So it's a really important time to go and serve them, so they don't starve and things. And it's like, that's really moments like that are really moments to start talking about it, I think, a lot of times. So it's or also sometimes if you have like little things that kind of conversation starters. Like if you have like a cover for your books that's like a Sacred Heart, or you add like a Sacred Heart pin to your backpack. And people are like, oh, what's that? Oh, it's a Sacred Heart. Like, and you can start explaining it. Uh, because you're kind of creating the opportunity for a discussion in that sense. So hopefully that's helpful. Nathaniel Robinson.
He says that I've known people who say that their child's autism or other disorder is actually a blessing. However, blessings are usually something that you would want for yourself and others. I've always wondered, would that person wish their child's condition on other families? Do you consider your autism a blessing? And if so, would you wish it upon other families or persons?
So I think it's kind of like you know God made us all in His image, and He's going to have like a certain natural variation in that. And I think like autism creates kind of is a blessing in a way. But and but I think God is wiser than me and decide and figure out who's going to get which blessing. In that sense. So it's like just like you know uh you know God's going to know that, like, whether whether a, a family's going to have a son or a daughter. I mean, parents can't really decide, like, well, ethically at least, they can't really decide, are we going to have a boy or a girl? They're like, well, this is the fertile time of the month and we're having relations, so if we do this a few months in a row, the chances are that we're going to have a kid. Whether it's a boy or a girl, you can't control that. Is a boy a blessing? Yes. Is a girl a blessing? Yes. Is one better than the other? Not really. Uh, you know, so I think in thinking of it in things like that, in the sense that every person is a blessing and every person has their individuality. So I wouldn't want to say, like, oh, like, you know, everybody needs to have like an autistic kid in their family, or nobody needs to have an autistic kid in their family, or anything like that. But it's more like God will provide for each according to where they are and what they need in that sense. So hopefully that's helpful. And now that we're learning autism is, relatively highly genetic, you usually have people who are in the family who are either autistic or having certain autistic traits without being autistic themselves. Like, for instance, uh, if a parent is an engineer, I think it's something like there's like four. It's like 4 times more likely the child will be autistic if the parent's an engineer or something like that. And not that every engineer is autistic, but certain traits that make good engineers tend to also be autistic traits. And and so you'll generally, God will put autistic people in families where they can be appreciated in that sense, and their differences can be less of an issue, like I shouldn't say less of an issue, less of a difficulty for the family, more helpful. So and I think like if I was married rather than not, I'd probably have, if I was married, if instead of entering the seminary, I continued computer engineering and I got married, and I had kids, I mean, there's a good chance at least one of those kids would be autistic. And that's like, and I would think that would be a blessing. And I think as an autistic person, I'd probably be better at, like, helping them out as a kid, It's like, so if that makes sense. And I think, but I don't think it's like, oh, every family needs somebody like that, because it's going to be what's best for that family, which that family's different than, like, you know, if I who's autistic, who's autistic, who was in engineering, married this other girl that I thought about, who was also in engineering. If we had kids, like, the chance they were autistic we had at least one autistic kid, is probably pretty high. But we're also kind of like predisposed to be better able to help a kid like that, if that makes sense. you know So Southpaw Ben.
He asks, Father, I am a new convert, 24 years old, having received my sacraments this past Palm Sunday, but have a strong background in the faith from my Protestant upbringing. How long should I wait before starting to actively discern priesthood? As well as an Eastern Catholic, I have to discern marriage and versus celibacy separately. So any advice on that would be appreciated.
Yeah. So I would say yes. You have to discern marriage and celibacy separate if you're Eastern Rite. I don't know the details of that because obviously I'm not Eastern Rite. I grew up in it. So Calgary, Alberta, Canada, where I grew up it has a lot of Ukrainians. Like literally outside of Ukraine and Russia, the biggest concentration of Ukrainians in the world was in like Western Canada, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. And so with that, there were Ukrainian Catholics around, so I knew there were married priests at the Ukrainian Catholic Church. It wasn't, but we never really went. But anyway, so that is something to discern there. I'm not going to be an expert in that. Ask a Ukrainian or whatever Eastern Rite you're with. As far as how long, I would say, usually I would say, you should wait about 2 years from when you convert until you enter the seminary. So I would look at 2024 as kind of your summer, fall 2024 is your first possible entry. But that doesn't mean you can't discern. You can't look at like, okay, well, like this community is having a come and see, or the Dawson seminary is having a vocation weekend or things like that. And you can do those type of things discerning, but realize, okay, like I'm not going to be able to join until 2024. Just the same way that like somebody might discern going into 11th grade, knowing that I still have 11th and 12th grade to do before I can enter the seminary, like I would encourage, if somebody was in 10th grade going into 11th and 12th and, they can't enter the seminary until they're done high school, I still encourage them to start discerning, but to realize, okay, like this is not like, have to be like super into it like right away, if that makes sense. I think there's a lot of good guides. One of the best is Father Anthony Bannon's Peter on the Shore, which is, I don't know if it's still in print. That was a really helpful one. He's a legionary who was basically like our major superior here in the U.S., our provincial, for a long time back. Like he ceased being the provincial like 15 years ago, but he was like for like the 90s and early 2000s. Anyway, so he wrote a very good book, Peter on the Shore, which is on discernment. He did. And there's a few others that I haven't read. There's a new one, like To Save 1,000 Souls, that I've heard is good, but I haven't read it, so I don't want to give. And it's more on diocesan priesthood as opposed to religious life. So, anyways, hopefully that's helpful. Swag narrows the vibe lord. Okay, I don't know how to be a vibe lord, but okay.
He's asked here, what does the daily prayer life of a priest look like?
So the daily prayer life of a priest varies quite a bit. I'll tell you a little bit about what every priest does for sure, and then I'll tell you about mine in the Legionaries of Christ. So every priest every day has to say the breviary, which is generally you have five hours you have to pray, which is a morning prayer, which usually pray like around 6 a.m. Basically, like usually, most priests like get up, shower, and then pray it. Basically, and all of these are psalms and like other Bible readings and things like that. Then you have the midday prayer, which is sometime in the middle of the day. You have evening prayer just before dinner around 6 p.m. And then you have compline, which is around 9 p.m., basically just before you go to bed. And then at some time during the day, you're supposed to do the readings, which have the same psalms, but then they have like longer 2 or 3 page passages from the Bible and from important readings to be aware of. So they usually have 2 readings. The first one is always the Bible, and the second one is some kind of important document, whether it's like one of the fathers of the church or one of the documents of one of the ecumenical councils or an encyclical or something like that, or like a more modern theologian that's very important, like Thomas Aquinas, something like that. And then most of the time, like for example, if it's the feast day of a saint, that sacrament reading will usually either be a writing of that saint or some kind of an account of the martyrdom of that saint or something like that, that's directly related to the saint. Um, and that's every priest has to pray every day. It's highly recommended you say mass every day, even if you don't have a public mass. You can say mass as a priest in private, just yourself. Because most diocesan priests and myself, and even like a religious priest, take like 1 day a week off. And then beyond that, every priest is highly recommended to pray a significant amount more. A lot of times in the U.S., they kind of promote the idea of like doing a holy hour, so 1 hour of adoration, and you can do one of the hours in there and then do other prayers. For myself and the Legion, we do every day. We do like 1 hour of mental prayer, which I mentioned, which is, it's really kind of free form in what your theme is. Reading the Bible, reading like a devotional book, like the second half of my book that's coming out is going to be like 52 daily devotions. And honestly, I tend to like some of those other books that are the same kind of format for my own mental prayer. And then we do the rosary every day, and we do 10 minutes of prayer in the middle of the day, which you can either do like a conscious exam or you can do like a spiritual reading. 10-minute conscious exam in the evening, 10-minute preparation for the meditation next day in the evening as well. Just before, those two are together with Compline just before bed. And then and those are kind of like the daily prayers we have. It's recommended you visit the Eucharist in the chapel a few other times and things like that. But those are kind of like the things that are required. We're actually, I think like ours says to say mass every day, not just kind of like, hey, it's recommended, but like so those are the main things that priests pray every day. Other priests vary a lot. If you go different religious communities, different diocesan priests and things. So incompetent giraffe.
He says, while I'm not medically diagnosed with autism or any other neurodivergent afflictions, my family does suspect I'm on the spectrum, so please take what I say with a grain of salt. I love God very much, but sometimes I'm concerned that my obsession with God and the faith feels like a hyperfixation rather than true love, that Christianity is just another special interest, like the space it takes up in my mind is little different from, say, a video game I obsess over. How can I know the difference, and how can I know how to properly direct that fervor into something spiritually productive?
This is a very good question for a incompetent giraffe, because that's actually like the fact that I don't have an immediate answer, and I don't, is and it's a question I should have an answer for. It shows it's a good question. So I do think there can be a that aspect of a special interest or hyper focus. But I think oftentimes that's going to be more on kind of the mind part. Like, hey, I know I can answer all these apologetic questions. I can do all this theology. Whereas, for lack of a better description, I think the way to show is through that prayer. So it's like, okay, like, am I moved by praying the rosary? Am I moved by or by doing like some kind of prayer, that communication with Jesus, even if it's a very heady communication, because we on the spectrum will tend to be, more intellectual even in that, but it's still kind of a relationship, not just kind of I'm doing theology. I can I can answer every apologetic answer in the book here, if that makes sense. I think that's probably the biggest divide, whether it's really kind of like it's that communication and prayer, even if that communication is kind of heady, it can still be it can still be helpful in that sense, in that relationship. Like, I don't know if any of you do like the MBTI things. Like, I'm an INTJ on that, which is like the most common for autistic people. And the joke in one of the INTJ memes is like, like they'll have everybody like the heart and the mind and the heart like just an outline drawing, and then it's like the INTJ like mind, and like where the heart is, it's like backup mind. There's like a heart. It's not a heart. It's just like another mind. It says like backup mind. you know, uh, and so yeah. So yeah, that's that can be helpful. Seeing people putting their own MBTI things in here. MBTI can be helpful to understand people. It's not the faith. It's not contrary to the faith to understand. Hey, like some of us are more like thinking, and some of us are more feeling, like and some of us are more like living in the moment. Some of us are more planning. It's like, and certain things are certain people are gonna be better at certain things than others. Like I was when I was a brother, there was another brother who was with me who was very much kind of like living in the moment and not planning. And one time, and basically like if you gave the two of us 5 minutes to prepare a talk for the kids, he'd prepare a better talk. If you gave us 2 hours to prepare a talk for the kids, I'd do a better talk. Like he ended up discerning out after, but he was like, with the two of us were working together when we were brothers, and one time, for whatever reason, we had assigned him to like plan out the retreat, and it was just absolute torture for me. And I'm like, okay, next time, for the next like times, I'm just planning out the retreat, and because when you planned out, you like tell me like 10 minutes before the talk, oh, you're supposed to give this talk, and and things, and I'm like, how am I supposed to plan in 10 minutes? Oh, that's plenty of time. And I'm like, what? And that's not like, neither of us is bad in that sense, but so hopefully that's helpful. So hello there. What's your question? Hello there, Father.
Hello there. Says, asks, have you ever experienced a woman who wants to consider having an abortion because her baby has any physical deformities? And what can you say to people who had abortions to be pro-life or to help the pro-life side?
So I've never directly met somebody in that moment. I've known a number who kind of like friend of a friend type things, where people have asked me about it on the like a Down syndrome diagnosis, for example. I can think of at least two cases of like friend of a friend was considering abortion over Down syndrome. And so I do think that that is a challenge. I think I do think that's helpful. I do think also, like, to what people who had abortions to be pro-life. I think that there is a lot there in that sense of like they know the experience, and they realize a lot of times, like, oh, this is painful. Like I had a friend who was a youth minister, and they were talking about how they really messed up a talk on abortion at the youth, like the Dawson youth thing, because they didn't consider this. Like they were giving this talk to like young adults or youth at the Dawson youth event, and they didn't think about like maybe some of these people had abortions, or maybe their parents had abortions, so they had aborted siblings or things like that. And so they didn't have any counselors when they were giving this. They didn't have anybody trained and prepped at the back to like receive kids who had like a really strong emotional reaction to this talk, because of their own or their close family's abortion. And I do think a lot of times, like in the pro-life side, we can really help out a lot with kind of those kind of issues a lot to help people get through them, because it's like I could only imagine it would be torturous to like if I knew like, oh, my parents like aborted my sibling, like that would be, it's like it would just be horrible, like so anyways, so yeah, so let's go through this quick because we got like 17 left. Somebody just put up here.
Thimble asks, in regards to marriage, in the West, it's under attack from the LGBT agenda, and he wanted to know how we can defend marriage as defined by God to be between man and woman purely from a secular view.
So what is the purpose of the state recognizing marriage? Why is marriage different from two roommates or two sexual partners who live together? And the reason that the state has historically recognized marriage, and not just kind of like, hey, they're like roommates, has to do with the kind of philosophical definition of marriage as the union of one man and one woman for the procreation and raising of offspring and their mutual benefit. And that for the procreation and raising of offspring is a huge part of it because we know that children, the next generation is going to be raised much better if they're raised in a stable environment, and each child has a right to the degree possible to be raised by their own biological parents. Obviously this is not always possible. Like one of my sisters was a foster parent and probably will be again if her kids when the ages of her kids are right. Because fostering, you have to have, there's rules about, like, I don't know if they're official rules, but they're kind of like at least unwritten rules about like how far the foster kid should be from your kids and things. Anyway, so they had a foster. She has a foster daughter who's like in her 20s now, early 20s, and so like there are good reasons that her mom is not allowed to be her parent. Is not allowed to be her mom. Like, and was not allowed to raise her, and she became a ward of the state, and that was fostered by my sister for like 7 years. And from what I understand from the situation, the state was completely in its right in doing that. But that should be like by far the exception in that sense, in the sense that every child should, to the degree possible, be raised by their parents. And we know that marriage is a sense of stability that can be a huge help to raising those kids. And so I think in that sense, I think that that's the kind of thing you have to look at for you're looking at marriage, legal marriage. And I think, unfortunately, it's very hard to defend it from a secular perspective when we have kind of like this, when we have people who are like divorcing and like remarrying like 5 times. Like as much as it's not actually true, there is, from a secular perspective, a popular perspective, when it's like, oh, Mr. on his 4th marriage, such an example of like, faithful marriage. We're going to take his word that we shouldn't have, gay marriage. And, that in itself is not a good argument, but it does make our argument weaker when somebody like that who's making the argument, unfortunately. And so I think in that sense, those type of things are important to look at for that, and to look at for how we defend gay marriage, how we defend marriage against like a redefinition of it. So hopefully that's helpful. That's so anyways, so Matt.
Matt asks, other than the autistic community, are you outreaching to the other groups within the disabled community?
So Matt, I guess I'm gonna have to type his answer. I don't know, like, because he's deaf, so I don't know if somebody can type this out for him. But I keep meaning to learn ASL. I learned enough. So part of the difficulty I have right now is I've been just moving around a lot. Hopefully in the next year or two, I'll get kind of a stable position teaching theology somewhere, and then I'll have like, I'm going to be in this city for the next 5-10 years at least, and it's much easier to look at those kind of ministries. So I keep starting a bit to learn ASL. I learned enough to say, hello, my name is Father Matthew, because I did say mass in Washington DC. They have a deaf community, like a deaf mass, where somebody signs it for the deaf community, and there are a few deaf priests. There's a Father Matthew O.P., who sometimes is on Twitter, who's deaf, who lives up in Edmonton. I think he's up in Edmonton, Alberta. He has, and there's a few others, and it's completely, there's not that many. Like I think, out of 40,000 priests in the U.S., it's like a dozen are deaf, something like that. So definitely there is a lot to reach out to those. I'm not doing a ton of it myself because, like, to a certain extent, like, each person is going to have their own bandwidth, and I do think that that fellow deaf people are better to reach out to other deaf people, because as much as I can learn ASL, it's always going to be a kind of second language for me. Like I've learned I've learned pretty good Spanish, but I still make mistakes in Spanish and I, make errors. I mentioned in my book, and one of the things that really led me to thinking about a book like that was, so I don't know if any of you know Dr. Ed Peters. He's one of the, he's canon law, at canon law on Twitter, and he's written a whole lot on canon law. Uh, so he's at canon law, not at canon lawyered. At canon lawyered is one of the people for the pillar, and at canon law is him, and he's just more like he's a professor of canon law at Sacred Heart in Detroit, and I had him for one class in my licentiate where we went over the book of the teaching offices of the church in the Code of Canon Law. And one of the things he said is that we need people like deaf people to evangelize other deaf people. One of his sons is deaf, and so like he learned enough ASL that like at his parish he'll interpret the mass for the deaf community. Like the priest will say it, and he'll be like make all the ASL signs so that all the deaf people in the area can come to mass there. So anyways, so
from Diamond Pancake, they say, I'm located in a very liberal state, and I often find my position regarding traditional marriage hard to defend. I know the fundamentals of why non-traditional marriage, or I assume they mean I know the fundamentals of why not non-traditional marriage, but I don't know how to put them into debating format, so to speak. Do you have any advice?
I think I answered that like
going along with that before.
Yeah, I think 2 or 3 questions ago we had almost the same question, so let's just keep going.
Yeah. All right. From the Philcath Minecrafter, what is your stance on dance as a form of prayer? Here in my country, we have, the country being the Philippines, we have numerous devotional dances like the Subli, the Sinulog, the Obando fertility dance, etc., that we dance during feast days and special occasions as both a prayer of supplication and of thanksgiving to God or a particular patron saint. Should these dances be incorporated more in the liturgical life of the church, such as inserting them in the Mass, or should they be left done outside the liturgy? Also, would it be okay for the church to encourage having prayer dances for every culture, or should they be limited only to certain cultures that already have these types of dances?
Well, I think that that is an issue of enculturation, and I think that my ancestors are all like Scottish, Irish, and German. I've lived all my life in Canada and the US, so I have a very kind of dance has a very romantic sense in the culture that I've lived my whole life in. And I think in our culture it will really tend to have that romantic sense if you're doing anything beyond just, like a procession. You could call a procession in some way a dance, but anything that would be more normally called a dance would be thought of as like romantic, even if it's just like square dancing or something, and so I don't think it's a great enculturation here, but at the same time I can see a lot of other cultures have different cultural traditions, and I generally just trust the bishops of the country to determine like what our specific cultural traditions are here and what's the best solution there, because I'm not going to be an expert in other cultures when I've lived in this culture 39 years and not in their culture for like 10 days. So I think that it's great if that works in the Philippines and that matches your culture. But I also think like our culture, we have to say that, like one of the best examples I can find is if you go to the canonization of Saint Juan Diego. The people brought in his kind of image to the Our Lady of Guadalupe Basilica in Mexico. They did kind of a dance, bring it in, that I think is a form of liturgical dance of the natives of Mexico, and I think was, in that sense is appropriate. But at the same time, I don't think we should do that same dance, in St. James Parish with largely, Anglo-Saxon Germanic ancestry Catholics, maybe an Italian Catholics in the USA. So,
all right.
So, Pastor Jim's homie.
And to our parishioners who don't know this current name change, this is also Dan, unwashed Dan, or not so clean Dan. As somebody who's grappling against habitual sin, any advice for someone who finds himself embarrassed every time he finds himself in confession every?
Well, I think, the embarrassment can be like a motivation, like, hey, like, I don't want to be embarrassed again. Um, I would say, there's a bunch of different means to put in place to try and avoid those types of things. And there's also, the sense that if it's that addiction can lessen the gravity of a sin because it lessen like we're not sorry lessen if it's a mortal sin because it can affect your freedom in that sense. It obviously is the same gravity as like, but you obviously you have to have gravity, knowledge, and freedom and free choice, and that free choice can be affected by addiction. So sometimes when you're grappling with habitual sin, that can be a challenge. And I would also say like to look at things like, okay, like how am I doing compared to the past? Like, maybe last time it's like, oh, I lasted 4 days until I fell into this habitual sin. Okay, well, this week I lasted 6 days. Well, that's an improvement. Hey, it's not perfect, but we're moving in the right direction. Like, okay, what am I make my goal like 8 days next week? Like, not to say like, okay, I'm gonna, ultimately, ideally, we want to like never sin again at all, but at the same time, like to celebrate those little victories along the way to kind of like, okay, I'm going in the right direction. So, so, anyways, hopefully that's helpful. IDK. I don't know. I don't know why you would make that. Like, 'cause when I see IDK, I'm like, I don't know. Why would you make that username? But
Uh, they say, I've been told by many people who are autistic that I very well might be based on many factors, but when I go to get tested for it, they say I don't have it. These people who say I might have autism then say that the test may not work for me because I'm female and autism is different for females. Since you're very familiar with autism and since you are someone I trust, what is your advice? Should I find someone else to test me who won't use just an interview and a bubble fill-in test?
so there are some differences in how it presents in females. That is a legitimate question. You have to look at things and what kind of questions they're doing. Um, like here you were saying like here you were saying uh so the thing was like they're doing these tests. Well, what tests are they doing? Like the first, like I said, I went to the first doctor and he basically just did the MMPI, which is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which is one of your most standard like psychological tests. If you've ever been to a psychologist and they gave you like 300, 400 question multiple choice test, probably the MMPI. It's like one of the most common psychological tests in the world, used at least in the U.S. Um, so what I would do is look at I would look at like somebody who's more specialized who's going to do other tests because those type of tests are not necessarily the most accurate for looking for autism. Uh, you have to look at what tests were used because uh, it has it just like some tests are really good and some tests are not. And if you're in the U.S., the uh, the Autism Society of America. It's based in Bethesda, if you get the right one. Bethesda, Maryland is the headquarters. Anyways, they have a kind of form you can fill out on their website, and they'll tell you who are the providers in your area. If you're on here, you want to avoid all the ones definitely want to avoid all the ones who do ABA because that's for kids, and there are serious issues with ABA as well. But they will they have kind of a you can ask around and see which ones do like teens and adults, and usually they'll know the right test to be the most accurate for like diagnosing female autism in that sense. I don't know about what in other countries how to find like people who actually are like experts in teen and adult autism. And even there, that's not a perfect system. It's the best one I know of in the U.S. But so so Fauna Reef.
Uh,
So, do you have any idea why nowadays Jews don't have priests and rituals? Well, I mean, they do have rituals. Their priests ended when the temple was destroyed. I mean, that's because the priesthood was offering sacrifice at the temple, and then they didn't feel like God inspired them to continue offering sacrifice like somewhere else when the
mhm.
temple was destroyed, and kind of like the uh, the 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 priesthood part of that kind of you know went away. So
Uh, Next, we've got Christoph Billing, who says, "What are some physical things one could do to prevent them from habitual sin?"
it just depends what kind of habitual sins you're dealing with. A lot of times, if it's something like with your phone or something, there's a lot of different a lot of different things you can do. Like uh, you can do that are like digital detox or lock me out, where basically you can set your phone so like after 9 p.m. at night, like your phone only does like text messages and WhatsApp and like and phone calls. So if somebody calls you, you're not in if your mom calls you or something, you're not in disaster. Maybe Google Maps, if you need to drive somewhere, but it won't like your web browser or all your different apps that you might be tempted with won't open up. As well, I think offering up little sacrifices can help. Like we talked about asceticism earlier, and then and then and things like that, and then also just realizing where your triggers are and trying to avoid those type of triggers. Like it's like you know if you're like, hey, if I go to the beach and I see all these like young ladies dressed in bikinis, I'm going to be tempted to like think about young ladies dressed in bikinis for the next 2 days. Well, maybe I go to a different beach where there isn't like a whole bunch of young ladies dressed in bikinis. Uh, you know, so hopefully that's helpful. What do we
Yeah.
have next? Flame.
Yep. Flame asks, "I was wondering your thoughts on Pope Francis's recent motu proprio Traditionis Custodes and the restrictions of the traditional Latin Mass since. And what is your opinion on the traditional Latin Mass in general?"
Yeah, I think I've already presented my opinion on traditional Latin Mass in general. I think it's, people should go to whatever Mass is helpful for them. I know how to say it. You know, I know people who go to it regularly, like especially FSSP parishes and things like that. Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter. I used to go to it some of the time when I was in college. Excuse me there. Uh, so what about Pope Francis' recent motu proprio? Yeah, I'm not sure about some aspects of that. Some things seem kind of interesting. I'm not sure exactly what how to interpret them. Like, well, it's not supposed to be in a parish, but then like then where is it? Like, and it's like it's not in the bulletin, but like what why? I mean, it's like some of the details like that. I do think that there was with there was some things that weren't I like Benedict Summorum Pontificum, but I do think some things happened that were a little problematic. Like somebody was telling me about they somebody I know who studied Latin, who likes the Latin Mass. He went to a Latin Mass. He's like, I'm 99% sure this priest didn't understand the Latin words at all and was just saying it like it was like and he didn't really understand Latin. And to me, that's the priest should have a basic understanding of Latin if he's going to say Latin Mass. Like I'll say Mass in Spanish. I have a good enough understanding of Spanish. I won't say Mass in like Portuguese. I mean, even though I could probably guess from knowing like Spanish and knowing what parts of Mass is, I could probably say it validly, I guess, in Portuguese. I'm not going to try. Like it's just like because my Portuguese, like I've taken no class in Portuguese. I'm not even like I'm not even like really basically fluent in Portuguese. Beyond just that, like I know Spanish and Italian, so you kind of get the sense of like a lot of the words are shared between the Romance languages. But like, and so things like that were sometimes a thing, and sometimes it was kind of and so like I would have something to say like okay, like the bishop can have some control and say like no, you have to know Latin, and no, like if it's just like, if there's not the if there's not the if there's not a community that that is for it in the area, well, it's not like, oh, the priest is just gonna like, I'm gonna switch all the parish masses to Latin mass, even though like nobody here really wants that, like. So I think it's a tough thing, and exactly how you exactly set those regulations and things. And I'm not super expert, so hopefully that's helpful. So that Ryko simp freak, I don't know what Ryko is, but okay. Uh,
Uh, yeah, they ask, is it okay to decorate Bibles and rosaries with images of characters that they like?
well, I would think it depends a lot on what kind of characters those are. Like I've seen anime versions of like the Blessed Mother, and there's nothing wrong with that, you know. But if it's anime characters that are most known for being naked, and although they're clothed in this one, they're most known for being naked, that's probably inappropriate, like, and rosaries, I mean, you really want the rosary itself to be like for prayer, and then like whatever you decorate the Bible should be somehow related to the Bible, uh, you know, whether it's, and I have no issue if like, hey, you have like somebody do an anime version of like the Blessed Mother or the Sacred Heart, or Noah or something, and that's what's on your Bible. Those are all characters in the Bible, all perfectly fine, like, but it's like, it would seem kind of odd to have like Sailor Moon on your Bible. It just wouldn't. It doesn't, like, even, well, it doesn't quite jive. And then if it's something that's like, overtly immoral, whether it's the bad guy or whether it's like something sexual, it can be even more of a problem. So hopefully that's helpful. So an army of ants.
Yes, he asks, what do you think about the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, and its relation with crusades and wars?
So like the idea of thou shalt not kill is really, a better translation in English might be like thou shalt not murder, in the sense that like obviously self-defense is allowed, and self-defense is allowed in the wider sense, like like for example, like if you have a gun to my nephew's head and I have a gun, I'm shooting you in the head. Sorry, and that's totally moral. If I, especially if I can't seem to convince you to like drop the gun, like, because I'm what I'm choosing is, I'm choosing, I don't want a gun through my nephew's head. I don't want a bullet through my nephew's head, and this seems like this is the only way to do it. And in the same way, it's like a war can be ethical on one side in the sense that it's like self-defense basically, or it's defense of like your neighbor, just on a wider scale. Um, I think objectively, in any war, only one side of the war could be a just war. I think it would be impossible for both sides, at least on the same part of the war. Theoretically, on different aspects of the same war, there could be just on both sides. Although subjectively, obviously, people could have different judgment. But like, for example, if we just take it back to a slightly more primitive time, like let's say like the Vikings, like all of a sudden like the Vikings are coming to raid your town, and like, you know, if if you build a some rampart, and trained all the men in town to like fire arrows and stuff, you'll be able to protect all the women, and you'll be able to protect yourself and all the women and children, so they don't get taken off and sold as slaves. Uh, you know, uh, and that's self-defense. I mean, obviously, you're a town, and then you have like a larger and larger into countries. But it seems very obvious, like for example, when in most cases, because that in most cases it's the defensive wars. If there's a defensive and aggressive side, in most cases the defensive side is the side that is on the that is on on the side of a just war. you know, and defense can go back and forth over time, because, like, for instance, like, well, it's like, because all the land of that there was a tried to attack in the Crusades was Christian land, and then was attacked by the Muslims. Then, like, and then like the Muslims were were killing off some of the people going on pilgrimage, and then it's like, well, how much defense there. I'm not saying that the wars are totally justified, that the Crusades are totally justified, but the kind of you have to ask, where is the self-defense? And because just war is basically an extension of the idea of self-defense in Catholic teaching. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but it's very much an extension of that. So
Right.
So now we have corned beef. We're
Yeah.
almost done here. I'm going to go through these quick.
Corned Beef says, I was listening to a Muslim apologist who says that Islam is the true religion because it's actually monotheistic. Christianity to them is invalid because it's three in one God. Hinduism is many gods in one. My question is, how would you counter?
So I think we have one God, but it's also there's other aspects of Islam that really are more of like, this is that more point to why it's not the right religion. Because obviously we have what's called philosophy of what's called, no, that's not the right name. It's called natural theology. So it's a part of philosophy that basically like what we can know about God without revelation. And most priests study it as part of like philosophy because it's philosophy. And the question is, obviously, we can know that God is one without revelation, but we don't know if God is what we mean by one. But is but what is God? Well, if God is just if God is love, how can God is love be one? Because if God is love and God is always love from before creation until after the end of time, well, he had that eternity before creation where he was love but had nothing to love. That seems kind of odd. But if we instead in God we see three persons, or we see even just two, you can see that the two persons in God can love each other from before time for all eternity, and God really can be love. Now, whether it be two or three, I think is a matter of revelation. I don't think with natural theology we can reach to three, but we can reach to a sense that God is at least not an absolute oneness, but a oneness that is somehow related to itself, in that it loves itself. Like the one person loves the other person in the Godhead, in God Himself. So hopefully that's helpful. Saint Francis of Assisi. Well, not obviously for Saint Francis, but
He asks here, did you have any experience or experiences that culminated in your discerning the priesthood?
I think I already talked about. I was listening to John Paul II for a recording of John Paul II for World Youth Day 2000. Really felt a call when he's saying, "Hey, we're called to be saints." I really felt a strong call. Hey, like kind of an interior voice saying, God saying, "I want you to be a priest," and that was February of 2001. And then that summer, I entered the seminary. So I kind of fast tracked discernment versus a lot of other people who take a little longer than that. But so, and then
Uh,
Vlad, the Impaler, is talking about similar thing. Did you ever discern
yeah.
married life before becoming a priest, or did you decide? So I kind of presumed married life. I kind of thought I had a few other experiences as a teenager. I thought maybe priesthood, but not really like too seriously. And I was kind of presuming married life. I had kind of thought about it. I said, you know what, I'm not gonna I'm gonna hang out with a bunch of girls and guys and things, but I'm gonna wait until about third year university to really start looking seriously at a relationship, because like I can't I can't support a kid until I get done my degree, and like so I can't get married until I got done my degree, because I have to be ready to support a kid if I get married, because like it can happen that way. Like my one sister, it's literally like you do the timing, it's like like it's like 3 weeks after they got married, I think she got pregnant, like, or something, like within a month or two after they got married, she got pregnant. And And so like I'm not going to be ready until my program was like a 5-year engineering program, so I'm not going to be ready to get married until like I'm done this program. So I'm not ready to to date unless I can get married in a relatively short period of time. I'm not going to be. I don't think it's. I didn't. Other people think differently. This is a personal opinion. This is not like doctrine. But I always thought it kind of like, unfair to be kind of going on having a serious relationship where you're thinking like, hey, this is preparing. This is helping me discern if I'm going to marry this person, when you're not at a point in your life where in a reasonable amount of time you could actually marry that person, because of whatever else is going on in your life. So that's at least that was yes I did and things. So we have Dylan EDU.
Yep. He after 3 or 4 pings I got in the live chat is asking what is the best way to argue against Judaism or Islam, given that they are monotheistic religions that acknowledge Jesus' existence, but not that he was the Son of God?
Yeah, so I think a lot of I think the difference. I think the points here are. I think the arguments are very, very different between those two. I think Judaism, you can look at all the prophets and say, like, you look at all these prophets, they're pointing to a Messiah. And most Jews will admit that. And then they're like, well, that part of it at least. But then they'll say, like, but he hasn't come. But, like, if you have all these signs and they're all pointing to this Messiah, and the Messiah and this one man came, and then right afterwards your temple was destroyed and he was like the living temple, maybe there's some signs there, like maybe something's going on to give you those signs that point to Jesus. So I'd really look at that. For as far as Islam, I would look at it a little differently, because I think a lot of the argument I would use with Islam is more about um, the kind of way the kind of way Muhammad lived, the kind of materialistic view of things, like heaven is 70 virgins on a couch, and it's just like is that really the ultimate fulfillment of mankind? That's going to be pleasurable, but like pleasure isn't the ultimate end. I mean, I mean, I just think of it like, if if I'm at home and my dad's like, hey, here's this great ice cream, and it's like yum yum, and it's pleasurable. Yeah, like he enjoys eating ice cream, like, and especially these really good ones. And then it's like, but then at the other point, it's like, but then it's like if you said like, would you rather eat like a million ice creams or be like there at your daughter's wedding when she's getting married to like this wonderful young man? And he'd be like, well, I'd rather be at my daughter's wedding. Why? Because that kind of happiness is a whole different level. But Islam, even in heaven, is still talking about kind of this kind of like eating ice cream level of pleasure and enjoyment, which to me points to some issue there. It's not talking about like a deep spiritual reality, like that. Hopefully that's helpful. I don't know if that's helpful. So we're on the last question with Lace.
Yes, he's actually relaying a question from one of our other mods here, AJI. He says, I know I'm not the first here to ask a question with this sort of context, but I'm drawn to the priesthood. And as I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and ADD when I was 5, this has led to a lot of academic struggle for executive functioning reasons throughout K through 12 and college. My friend Dean has also felt drawn to priesthood or diaconate, and he faced obstacles in learning due to his autism and Down syndrome. He's not started college, and I'm about to take a break from college for at least a semester to refocus and reevaluate. Do you have any recommendations for people like us who are discerning holy orders but might not be college ready due to autism?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. First of all, I think you do have to realize that if you're called to be a priest, you have to have the capacity to finish college. Like that's a prerequisite for the priesthood. There can be religious brothers who are not as super educated, and that's perfectly fine. And we bless all those vocations. So I think that can be a reality. But I do think like as far as like especially conditions that are more like Down syndrome, where it's more of a where finishing college is much more of a challenge, that can be an obstacle, much more of an obstacle. I would look at with Asperger's, which is now just autism. Like just for those people who are not aware, so in the U.S. at least and Canada, we use what's called the DSM, the Diagnosis Statistical Manual, and so we in 2014ish they started the fifth edition, and the fifth edition changed, combined Asperger's and autism all together into one autism spectrum disorder. So that was what I was diagnosed under. The clinician, the psychologist told me like, yeah, if you'd come in 2 years beforehand, it would have been Asperger's, just because like those are the definitions we had. Some other countries use what's the ICD, the International Something of Diseases, and they're on the ICD-10, I think, and the ICD-10 still distinguishes Asperger's and autism, although it says they're related. So it's I'm not going to get into those details, but just so people are wondering what the difference is. And so I think a lot of times, you have to look at those things and say, okay, like, can I finish university? Can I do some of the like some kind of ministry that priests do? Like you might say to yourself, you know what, I never want to be a pastor and manage a parish. Like personally, I would say that myself. I don't want to manage a parish or manage like a big. Like I was talking to the assistant provincial basically the other day, and I was like, I have no desire to take your job. Like I want to teach theology, and write books and write articles, and and I think I can serve the church much more doing that than trying to like fit myself into something else. Now, it's fit myself into like a role that I'm not as good at as you were at this role. So I think with things like that, you have to look at it and say, okay, like what kind of capacities do I have, and what kind of accommodations do I need, and how would that work out in practice? Like a lot of autism is just like dealing with sensory issues. Like I know myself, like I obsessively, if I leave the house, I always carry my sunglasses, even if I'm leaving like at like some weird hour, because I know that like if I'm out in the sun for too long without sunglasses on, I get a huge headache very quickly. I don't know how much that is being autistic, how much that is being like all like Northern European and like having about the highest genetic probability of skin cancer. So I'm like super low on melatonin, and things like that. So those kind of questions you have to look at, and so it's like, and so you have to discern with the diocese. It's like, okay, like I can hear confession, I can say mass, I can preach, I can do all these things. Well, yeah, I foresee that with the training in 6 years or something, I would be able to do that. Not maybe I can't do it right now. Like if in your first year seminarian and if you were to give up and give a homily, it's like garbage. That doesn't necessarily mean you're not called. It just means like, hey, like you're a first year seminarian. There's a reason we have a seminary. Take your classes well so you don't so you can preach better, and so your theology and things. So hopefully that's helpful. I don't think that there's kind of one specific thing or not, but I think there's a lot of, and I think a lot of it for the discernment for autism is more like the specific manifestations each person has rather than like autism in general. Like I have like is like, okay, I need help with this or I need help with that. And that's very, and that's what I really need help with, or that's what I need, well, that's what I'll struggle with. If it's like, it's like, okay, I'm not going to be the most social person in the world, so I'm not going to like, I'm going to go to the social event, but I'm going to like sit on the side with like and chat with two or three people most of the evening, or I'm gonna, or I'm gonna be, and that's not wrong. That's perfectly fine for a priest to do, as long as he's not like being rude to everybody else. So hopefully that's helpful. I don't really have an answer. I do think with a lot of these questions, I do think one of the things I keep thinking I should write out, but I haven't written out specifically yet, is a whole kind of like set of questions on kind of an article on discernment, uh, autistic discernment, vocational discernment, whether to religious life or the priesthood, because there were a number of questions here, and I've had a number of other questions. I've helped a few people individually where I'm getting into like okay, what kind of things you're going to need as to help you out to live in the priesthood or to live the priesthood or whatever, or to live a religious life. But I do think a kind of longer piece like that might be helpful. Maybe I'll put in like homiletic and pastoral review or something like that. Uh, I don't know if any of you know that. It's kind of like a journal that's like between kind of like a popular journal like the Register or something like that and a pure academic journal. You can search for it. It's hprweb.com. I've written half a dozen articles in it, on things like what to do about if somebody professional to how to interpret a Morris thesis and things like that. So anyways, I think that's good. I thank you all for this. I am going to go and I'm going to go and, have a little bit to eat and then go and pray my night prayers and go to bed, I think, because usually I'm starting
Yeah.
night prayers about now, but
Yeah.
usually I also eat dinner at 6:30. So I had like a large snack before I started here and I didn't really eat dinner. So,
Okay. Well,
so let's, Lace is
before you
suggesting a
go,
closing prayer. I think that's a great idea.
yeah.
So,
Uh,
so let's close, uh, let's close in prayer in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord Jesus, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for all of the blessings, and we ask you to continue to enlighten our hearts, continuing to bless us. And we pray together. Hail Mary, full of grace. The Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the
all
Father, and the
right.
Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Oh, look at that beautiful Immaculate Heart of Mary image.
Yeah. All right. Well, Father Matthew, I want to thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you for
Everybody in the
having me.
chat, yeah, everybody in the chat, you can check out Father Matthew's social media on Facebook.
Yeah,
He's
I'll
also
just
on
post.
Twitter.
You going to my web browser. I'll post my website. All my main socials are just like right on the top of the page. It's pretty obvious, like
All
the main
right.
socials from there, uh,
And
and and things. So that's just like my own personal like website, which is like a blog as well. And it goes straight from the blog and it has a lot of blog, but it also has like my social on top. It has a few different kind of other links for stuff that I have. I kind of keep it all there rather than like trying to like manage 50 different places.
right.
So
Also, for sure, check out his book, God Loves the Autistic Mind, especially for those of you in our server here who are autistic and would love some extra materials on prayer and devotion to God.
yeah, and it's helpful even if you aren't, but if you have like siblings or others. So I just put the link there. It's like the page is called Order My Book, so that then it appears right on the menu on the top of the page, but that has all the different links to order it. It's available in Canada, the US, and the UK, and it's available physical. It's available on Friday, physical, Kindle, Nook, and what's the other one? It's like Kubo or Kobo. What is it? Kubo. I don't know. I don't have a Kubo, but uh, it's available on Kubo, whatever that is, which is which is like an ebook format. I'm not. Don't ask me. I have a Kindle and I have physical books. I don't have any of these other ebook versions. So God
All right.
bless.
Yeah. Have a good evening.
Adios to y'all.